Were you aware of branch change?
I was mildly aware that people were talking about it, but I was pretty satisfied that okay. So the thing was when I the branch in IIT that I got was something called Polymer Science and Technology. So it was an integrated BTech MTech, not the most competitive branch out there, but good people in it nonetheless. And I was so in Roorkee they have this term called Dhakkan, which is the last person to get into
Hmm.
it, at least from the general category, the last person to get it. So that was me. I was the Dhakkan in that branch. So I came with a tremendous amount of humility that I must be the dumbest person to have gotten here. So let me not be too ambitious. Let's just keep quiet and just do the exams and assignments and such. Don't think about branch change at all. Maybe औकात nahi hai, so to say. That's the mindset I came with.
Got it. But you did branch change. So how
Oh,
did that happen?
well, again, I hate showing off, but I do show off. I branch changed and became the topper of my branch when I graduated. So my name is over there in
Wow.
Roorkee as the top student of the branch. So it's an interesting story. So
Welcome to IIT Podcast, where we talk about the life journey of IITians. And in this episode, we'll be talking with Professor Sushobhan Sen and his incredible stories. He was average student and something changed in 5th class, which made him topper. And another story that he was a Dakkan, which means the last ranked student in his branch when he joined IIT, but by the time he graduated he was the topper. So how did that happen? And then the most interesting part is his journey of becoming an professor back at IIT. How did he do that? So there's a lot in this episode, and this is very special, and I'm sure you're gonna find it special and a lot to be learned here. So let's dive right into it.
Hello, Sushobhan. Welcome to IIT Podcast. I'm so excited because I met with a lot of professors earlier with a sense of fear, but today I'm looking like it's going to be different than how it has been in the past. So welcome to IIT
thank you.
Podcast.
Thank you. It's still
Yeah.
funny to call myself a professor, but it is true.
Have you got used to it?
I still find it weird sometimes, like that it finally happened. It took like 10 years to get there,
Uh-huh.
and but then the work is so busy you don't have time to think about it all that much.
Got it. So when I became father, and it took me a while to realize I'm a father now because it feels when things happen suddenly, you're like, really? It takes some time to sink in, and then now
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, I feel well in that role. So now let's we start this podcast with talking about how you were when you were in college so that people get idea about your personality. So we'll start with that. How do you think your personality was when you were in the college,
Hmm. I
IIT?
wasn't very friendly, I think, that I will admit. So essentially, so the way I was at IIT Roorkee, but so IIT Roorkee, most people might not know, has two campuses. So there's a campus in Saharanpur, which is a much smaller one, which not it's like significantly reduced right now than where it was back then. And there's the main campus in Roorkee. There's a third campus in Noida, which I never been to. So I actually, when I got into IIT Roorkee, I went to the Saharanpur campus first. And then I changed my branch, which is a story by itself. Second year, which not just changed my branch, but changed my campus also. So there was a lot of new learning to do in second year, and I don't know. Of course, I wasn't the only one who moved. There were several, and everybody had their own way of doing things. In my case, I guess I tried to keep myself busy most of the time. I wasn't the most outgoing person in the sense I'm not looking to be friends with everybody on the planet. I would have a small group of very close friends who I relied on very strongly. And otherwise, I mostly kept myself busy. Busy is the keyword that comes to my mind. How was I in Roorkee as a college student? I was pretty busy most of the time.
And what were you busy in? Academics? A lot of your time was in academics.
No, no, actually, I would say that was maybe 50% or slightly less than 50% of the time. So I was involved in Shitij, which is the literary magazine over there. I was also in the literary club, but within the literary club, there's something called the Debating Society. And then I also did some model UN stuff at IIT Roorkee. We organized that at Cogni at one point. So there were a couple of cultural events that I was, and the nature of debating and all such is you have to meet every week, and even writing, you kind of do preps every week. So it was that stuff which kept me quite busy. Academics could have taken longer, but I hope I managed it better. So that was maybe 50% or slightly less than that.
Got it. So were you mainly in these debating and social cultural events? And what was your first year choice? Was it NSS, NCC, NSO?
So let me try to remember. It's a good question. Okay, first year choice was NSS. I admit I didn't actually do much in that. Well, to be honest, social service is good. I don't think I'm very good at it. But first year choice is NSS. I did have the chance to go to some of the slums in Saharanpur, meet the people there. It's, the difference in poverty level between the slum and just next to the slum is pretty massive. So that's something I was exposed to in first year. I couldn't really expand on it much more beyond the first year.
Got it, got it. So let's jump to your childhood and try to connect how your childhood and upbringing, you know, put you in the place to go into IIT and your personality. So if you can speak a little bit about your upbringing.
Yeah, so I was born the same year that Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated, so didn't and actually very close to that time also, so not a very pleasant time. So my father was in the Indian Navy, so that was actually a pretty rough time when I was born because the entire country was on alert. And then because of that, we kept moving to many cities. So I've lived in so many different cities. We tended to stay near the coast. Although when I was, I think, 1 year old, apparently I lived in Noida for some time, though I don't have any recollections of it. But I lived in Goa, in Mumbai, in Cochin, Vishakhapatnam, Noida, as I mentioned early on. And then finally, when my father took VRS, we came to Hyderabad, where I spent again about another 5 years. And those were the 5 years leading up to joining IIT. So, yeah, it was a lot of moving. It was going to a lot of different states and a lot of different places. And eventually that continued after I moved to IIT as I realized it didn't end after that. And that's how it started out, I guess.
Got it. And you have siblings?
I do have an older sister. She is in the United States right now. She is a
Gotcha.
mechanical engineer. So I became the civil engineer. She became the mechanical engineer.
My brother-in-law was in Navy. He was in submarines, and I've been to Vishakhapatnam. After I
Wow.
graduated, I had a 3 week vacation, one of the best vacation I had. If
So,
you remember Puram Beach,
yeah.
Yarada Beach.
So my best recollection of the Navy is I have been on INS Vikrant, which is the decommissioned aircraft carrier. So I've actually been on I guess you could call it the tarmac, or that's used for land-based facilities. But I've been on the landing facility basically on INS Vikrant. That was pretty nice.
And the ship is actually very compact. So when I was in Vizag, my brother-in-law took me to the ship as well, and I was surprised. The pathways and everything is so compact, which makes sense. Everything needs to be very compact.
Yes, so everything is space optimized because the my understanding is the engine takes a lot of room, so you can't skimp on that. So therefore, living quarters is kind of at a premium. So anything which involves people walking around is premium space.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when you were moving around because your dad was in Navy, was it a challenge as a student, as a kid, because you make friends and now you're into a new place and then there's a bunch of new people, maybe different language as well because you're moving from a state to different
Yeah,
state.
as a not maybe that was absolutely a thing. Uh, Different language. Plus, since I'm more from the northern part of the country, I speak the language over there. So moving mostly in the south, you get an additional problem that the languages are not even similar to what you
Yeah,
like right now I live in Gujarat. Yeah, I can pick up the language somewhat. It's not too difficult, but the southern languages are quite challenging on their own to learn. They're great languages. They have good history and all on their own, but not easy to learn, especially if you have to keep moving around. And there's a lot of difference between them. So I lived in Hyderabad. I lived in Kochi. Malayalam and Telugu are nothing like each other. So
Mhm.
it's not even that you can get used to the southern languages. They're very different from each other also. Unlike at least the northern languages have some similarities between them. So that was
Can
definitely a challenge. And as you said, moving, no, it's like when I joined a new school, it was always in my mind that I'm leaving in another 1 or 2 years anyway. It was nearly
Mhm.
guaranteed that is going to happen. So yeah,
Got
it was a strange kind of existence to live on. But in the end, I think, yeah, it was frustrating to live like that. for some time, I can't say I liked it very much. But later on, when I moved to Roorkee and then went to the US, etc., it was a valuable skill to have, to be able to move and quickly adjust to a place, not have a culture shock kind of thing because you've been shocked out of feeling, I guess. uh, it was a useful skill.
Got it. So how did you got the thought of becoming an IIT, when did that dream came into your life? Do you recall?
So I will say, well, my parents gave it to me. So for those of your listeners who have ever been to Hyderabad, IIT is a very big deal over here. Like it's everywhere. Everybody knows what it is. Every second family, for good and bad reasons, which I won't go into. But for good and bad reasons, everybody wants their kid to go into IIT. So same idea was with my parents that, well, you need to make a good career and become rich and all that stuff. So go to IIT and your life will be set the moment you get it. So 10th class, I remember I was the head boy, prefect, whatever they call it now in school, which was good. And then it was, okay, enough fun and games. Now it's time to lock you up in coaching institutes so that you can go to IIT. So it was
Got
mostly
it.
my
And
parents. I guess I didn't realize the magnitude of how good IIT was and how great it is until probably 1 or 2 years after I was into the system.
mm, how about your sister? Was she an inspiration? Because she is mechanical engineer, so was it like she was also preparing for it?
So she was also preparing for it. She didn't go to IIT. She went to a good local college here in Hyderabad. Inspiration was, I'd say it's not like we choose branches. So it's like, well, she got mechanical engineering because that's what came out of concept, basically. In my case, it's
Mhm.
more complicated because I changed my branch into civil. That's for later. Yeah, I mean, she's been an inspiration in the sense she was much better than me at coping with moving to different places. Like she would quickly, like, within 2 days in a new place, bang, she'd have a new group of friends that she'd be hanging out, which I
Mm,
always struggled to do. So we
got it.
are and were very different people. She has a lot of skills which I wish I had, but I don't. And then of course I had skills which I have, and which I guess she wants
Yeah.
my nephew to have, but that's presumptuous.
God. And how were you as a kid? Were you always ranking high in your classes?
So I would say there was a distinction. I was a slow beginner, and I don't know the technical terminology for all this, but maybe up to fifth class, I was not very good. I still remember this one stayed in my mind that I think my first or second class report card, a note was put over there. Oh, very poor communication skills, doesn't talk to anybody, something like that was on it. It was maybe after fifth class, and I don't know what biologically or mentally what happened or neurologically what happens, but after fifth class, okay, I started taking things more seriously. I'd say I never had trouble in terms of homework and such things. Nobody had to sit and tell me to do my homework. I would get everything done on time. But yeah, in terms of having a competitive spirit to kind of top the class and all that, that came maybe around after fifth class and arguably is still there. So it was a
Mhm.
slightly slow start compared to others, but yeah, eventually to answer your question in short, yes. Was I mostly a topper in classes after fifth class? Yeah, almost always.
Got it. So yours is like a step function. After fifth, it's boom.
Yeah, and the only thing I can recall is that it was somewhere in fifth class that I got this thing of competing with other people. Like, okay, I don't, and this is a very crude way of putting it, but I don't like this other person, so I have to do better at them in English or maths or whatever. I don't know where I
Mhm.
got that from, but that built up in fifth class. And that stayed and evolved in many ways, even up to now.
I see. I see. Interesting. Yeah, like in life, one thing I struggle with is everything has a good and bad in it. Let's say something bad happens to you, that can change you in a good way, you know. So
Yeah, I mean, there are
every
challenges, and I don't recall what my challenges were at that age, but you face challenges and you respond to them differently. And that response shapes the way you look at the world.
Absolutely. So coming back to 11, 12. So how was your preparation for JEE? Were you going to coaching class with school?
So the way it works in Hyderabad, and any of your listeners from here will know this, the coaching class and the school are the same thing, effectively.
Mhm.
So the idea is that really the 11th and 12th syllabus is honestly so simple, frankly, that you could technically study the whole thing in 1 month. And not to show off, but I had a 98% in 12th class, right? Across
Ah,
maths, physics, chemistry, English, and Sanskrit. So it was very easy. It took barely any time to study that. So most of the time went to coaching, but the coaching and the school were effectively the same thing. And even legally that was true. Uh, so I was most of the time, I would say 99% of the time was studying or preparing for these competitive exams, 1% for whatever, board exams.
Hmm. And were you confident, like after 10th, what was your score in 10th? Pretty high?
Something, yeah, 90 plus, something like that. That far back, I don't know. I remember I did badly in English, which to this date still shocks me because I consider my English to be very good. But I did badly in English in 10th. But it was good, nonetheless. I mean, again, when it comes to 10th marks, 99% is considered bad in some places. So, but I was good
Mm.
in that relative scale.
Got it. And was it after 10th, did you consider there are options of science, maths, biology, commerce, or was it parents told you you have to prepare for IIT and you kind of knew
Well,
you
my
have to
parents
prepare
told me
for
you
it?
can become a doctor, you can become an engineer, no pressure on either. So,
Okay.
and my thinking then was, well, doctors seem to have to study a lot, so maybe I shouldn't study, become a doctor, be an engineer. You only have to study for a few years, and you can move on with life. Now, the irony is, I do have doctor in front of my name right now.
And
Legally, I
you
can use the title doctor because I have a PhD,
and you have to study for rest of your
and you
life
have to
since
study
you're
for
into
just a little bit.
professors.
Yeah.
So,
So my thinking was just the reverse. But if COVID taught me anything, I would be a very bad doctor. So it's a good thing I did.
mm, got it. And for preparation of IIT, like students who are preparing for IIT, what would you tell them? How rigorous was it for you?
So it was quite rigorous. We had these test series every week and classes, and we would come there maybe 8 in the morning and leave at 8 in the evening. So it was like 12 hours trapped effectively inside. It's a very, very tough life. And now I have students and I meet first year students. So I get their perspective and it only seems to be getting worse. Amazing. I was lucky, well, lucky or whatever, in the sense that unlike a lot of my friends, I only started in 11th. So I didn't start these foundation programs or whatever they call it. But many of my
Hmm.
friends, even as early as 8th class, like in the morning, they would be up at 5 and go to, I won't name any, but go to some foundation program or something. I didn't do any of that, but my understanding is increasingly more and more people are doing
Yeah. I saw there was a FITZY sixth class preparation for IIT. I was like, what? I also got 11th grade. I started preparing for it seriously. But from sixth, man, it seems like that's too much, like 6 years.
So
But I guess,
mostly, I don't know, because I know what they teach. It's like in sixth, they teach you a little bit of the seventh class syllabus. So you're like, they're not going to teach you calculus and differential equations in sixth class. So what
hmm,
can they teach you? They can teach you a little bit above what you're learning. Does that give you a competitive advantage over your peers in the short term? Maybe. In the long term, not really. I don't think it makes that much of a difference. So now the coaching institutes will hate me for saying this. Um, if they can impart you the idea of logical thinking and mathematical understanding of things, good. Most of the time, they're focused on how to get through an exam and how to select from ABCD. So I really don't think that's helping much. The other way around is once they come into IIT, they have to spend some time unlearning all that stuff and then learning how to think like a normal person.
why you say that they have to unlearn, as in which aspect?
Correct. So a lot of stuff which goes into this JEE prep and that can start from sixth class is multiple choice questions. So you're
Hmm,
not really thinking of how to solve or forget solving. You're not really thinking of appreciating the problem. You're really concerned
hmm,
about getting the right answer. And that is not what real life, certainly not what engineering is like. So one struggle we have with students is to kind of teach them that don't worry about getting the final answer. Even as late as MTech and PhD students I struggle with this, that don't worry about getting the right answer. Understand the procedure, understand what the question is asking you and what are the assumptions. How do you turn a set of assumptions into a mathematical formulation and then use maths to solve that? This is something that coaching doesn't teach you.
got
And
it.
that becomes a real struggle for once you get into college.
Got it, got it. So among the subjective and objective, there's two fields, right? You write a subjective answer and you have an basically A, B, C, D. So
Mhm.
personally, for a person like me, like I like A, B, C, D because I would get very less marks in a subjective answer where I have to write steps. But if there's A, B, C, D, I can figure out B, D is eliminated. A is gone, I would just put value in, So I don't know. Some people say street smart or book smart.
Well,
Like if
I
you're,
would put it more fundamental. It's neither actually. It's whether the question. What is the question trying to ask? So
Mhm,
this is more theoretical, but there are levels of learning essentially. Something called Bloom's taxonomy for people interested in pedagogy. So there is one level of learning where you're just testing skills. Like you learned how to do this in class. Can you do this in this problem? In which case
mhm,
there is an exact answer. So multiple choice questions are fine for that. That's not how real life works in most cases. High levels of Bloom taxonomy comes into evaluation and critical analysis, where there may not even be a right answer, and even the person making the question may not know the right answer. It's more of a it's more of a test of can you understand how to reach one of the many possible answers. So, and that multiple choice questions are not amenable to test that particular thing. So I wouldn't say street smart or book smart. It's more a question of what you're trying to ask in the question.
mm. Got it. So back in the days, our University of Roorkee test was, I think, theoretical, in a sense, subjective, where you
Subjective,
have
yeah.
to write the long answers. So if you were given the power, probably you preferred that over the ABCD, so that students coming into IIT also get used to that mindset of how to solve it.
Yes, but only if I don't have to check the answers because it's a problem of scale also.
Yeah,
Back
yeah.
in the day, University of Roorkee, what, 1,000 people wrote the test, less than 1,000, a few hundreds wrote the test. Today, IIT GA is taken by lakhs and lakhs of students. You can't
Mm,
scale subjective to that. So it's really a question of
I
how do you scale.
see.
I don't know if artificial intelligence or something can save us from all that. I'm not in that field. But scale is a practical issue that limits how much you can test.
Got it. So it's probably the scale which changed the formats from all these subjectives to more of an objective.
Yeah, and this changed, I think, in maybe the early 2000s, it changed, if I'm right. And that was also when engineering was becoming a very serious career choice for people. Like many of our parents' generation, they would do a BA or a BSc or something like that. Our generation, engineering became a big thing. So then more people started writing the AIEEE and IIT JEE and other exams, which have now all been merged into one kind of exam. So scale then started becoming an issue, and that's when they started moving towards this multiple choice question.
Got it. The OMR sheet. I remember in our
Yeah.
institute we had OMR, and I think one day they said now we got OMR machine because they used to make errors. The teacher who would check OMR, they
Oh, they
would
have to
make
check it by hand.
errors.
Interesting.
Yeah, back in the day. So we would go like, no, this is C, C is right. So when they got the OMR machine, we were all very happy. Like, okay, finally, everyone will get, because sometimes what can happen, I can check my answer sheet and tell you what you did right and wrong. But what if you made mistake on others and they got more marks, which they don't deserve? So
Yeah,
we
so
were
I mean,
very
that's something
happy
we
with that.
always say in teaching. You can be strict, you can't be inconsistent. So
Hmm.
inconsistency in grading is something that really bites students. Strict is not really a problem.
Yeah. So how was your expectation when you gave J or when you were preparing? Did you always felt confident you'll get through, or were there ups and downs where you were really confident and then you doubted yourself?
So I would say that, so JEE has three parts, plus they had a little bit of English, but it was maths, physics, and chemistry. So in that, I would say maths I was fairly confident and good at, and still I'm very good at maths. Uh, I was better at chemistry than physics. Ironically, I was better at chemistry than physics during J, and then it flipped completely when I got into it. I just became terrible at chemistry and became much better at physics. Still not sure how that happened. So I was always during JEE, yeah, I was worried a little bit about physics that I wouldn't be able to do it properly. And there was, at the end of 2 years, I can palpably say there was a certain amount of burnout at that point. Like when you write these exams for 2 years weekly, over 100 of them, there was a large degree of burnout towards the end. I didn't do extremely well in JEE, uh, but I mean, I still got into IT, but it wasn't with a great rank. And part of that, I can say, yeah, I was pretty burnt out towards the end. Like at the end, I was like, I don't care because I'm just sick of this.
I see, I see. So then after that, you got your results and you realized you cleared IIT. So how was that day? Were you all happy or with the rank? Were you like no, I could do better, or how was that
Yeah,
way?
I would say it's the latter because I did better in some of the other comparative exams, like with BITS and AIEEE. I did better in those. So then, although, yeah, I cleared IIT, it was with a relatively poor rank. So then the issue came, okay, do I go to IIT with, because immediately the next question comes up is what branch I want to take, which
Yeah.
is a hellish debate altogether. And I still have parents asking me that. I can talk about that when parents come to me to ask the same question. Uh, but yeah, so it was an issue of, yeah, I did well and I did well in AIEEE and other exams. I could get the great, wonderful branches, which you already know which one those are, in one of those institutions, or I could get a not very great branch in IIT. And I'd say a huge amount of energy and frustration was consumed after the results on just figuring this one thing out.
And then why did you pick IIT? You would have already known the branch, right? When you were making this decision that you're getting IIT Roorkee
Not
Saharanpur
really. No,
campus.
actually, I didn't because the thing is, once your rank is low enough, then the statistics of because people published last year so and so rank got this much. But if you just look at the last 5 years, the amount of noise in those statistics increases as the rank increases. So you can be almost
Mm,
sure that rank 1 to 10 is going to IIT Bombay Computer Science or IIT Delhi Computer Science, something like that. Not much noise in those statistics. But
mhm,
as you go deeper down, rank number 5,000 and rank number 4,000 might have a 1 mark difference in the exam. But if you look at it over the years, there's a tremendous variation in terms of where they go. It depends which branch is more popular at that time or
mm.
random luck, what do people put in their forms. So at lower branches, I did not have a good idea where I'm going. And that was
Yeah,
another kind of open issue. And then once I got my allotment, that was another issue because it wasn't a very great branch. So yeah, so up to the point of getting into IIT, it was a lot of ups and downs.
got it. So why did you choose IIT over other college where you could have got computer science? What made that decision clear for you?
My father, basically. I wish I could give a deeper answer. But it
Okay.
was, typical Indian parents that was, yeah, getting to IIT because IITians are IS officers, IITians are managers or whatever. I don't think being an engineer was ever the point. Like,
Mm,
nobody cared that, okay, you are an engineer, so you're going to do engineering. That was not actually a strong correlation. And even today, it is not a very strong correlation. But the idea
got
was, okay,
it.
IIT gives you a good environment. In hindsight, all that logic was correct, although it was quite a frustrating debate at that. Uh, but yeah, IIT is a great environment and outcomes seem to be great from there. So it doesn't matter what branch you study, which
Mm,
I'm hesitant to say that's true, but there is some truth to that. And I'm hesitant to say it's true because I'm a professor myself, so I can't say my branch is irrelevant. But there
yeah.
is some
Were
truth
you,
to that. But yeah, basically, father insisted go to IIT, so
uh-huh.
landed up at IIT Roorkee about things.
Were you aware of brand change?
I was mildly aware that people were talking about it, but I was pretty satisfied that okay. So the thing was when I the branch in IIT that I got was something called Polymer Science and Technology. So it was an integrated BTech MTech, not the most competitive branch out there, but good people in it nonetheless. And I was so in Roorkee they have this term called Dhakkan, which is the last person to get into
Mm,
it, at least from the general category, the last person to get it. So that was me. I was the Dhakkan in that branch. So I came with a tremendous amount of humility that I must be the dumbest person to have gotten here. So let me not be too ambitious. Let's just keep quiet and just do the exams and assignments and such. Don't think about branch change at all. Maybe aukaat nahi hai, so to say. That's the mindset I came with.
got it. But you did brand change. So how
Oh,
did that happen?
well, again, I hate showing off, but I do show off. I branch changed and became the topper of my branch when I graduated. So my name is over there in
Wow.
Roorkee as the top student of the branch. So it's an interesting story. So first year, most of the classes are same, and most of them are boring, in my opinion. So there was a particular I forgot the class, but so the classroom that we studied in, they were building a new lecture theater hall, like a multi-story lecture theater center next to it. And they're building, I mean, like starting from scratch, cutting the foundation and all that stuff. And I used to sit next to the window, and the professor was boring, so I would stare out the window and look at the construction. And I found it really interesting to me, okay, this looks like something interesting that's happening over here. It's way more interesting than what's been taught in class. So then, when it came towards the end of first year, when okay, turns out my GPA was not bad, and I actually could apply for a branch change. So as tradition goes, I put my first choice as computer science because everybody does that. But I put my second choice as civil engineering because I found that construction to be so interesting. I thought, okay, this is something interesting to actually study. I tell this to my students also. I am eternally grateful that I did not get my first choice. And I say that I do a lot of programming, etc. myself. And I still say it's a good thing I didn't become a computer scientist. And I got my second choice as civil engineering. I'm extremely happy with that.
I see. So you were not aiming to change branch. You were just doing
I didn't
studies
think I was able
regularly.
for it. I didn't think very औकात भी है branch change करने की.
Wow. So from like it's life में कुछ भी हो सकता है. Like from Dhakkan to branch topper within a
Yeah,
span of 4 years. And that too
yeah.
when you were not really seeking it to start with. You were just doing your
I would
stuff.
say even the branch topper thing, until the last semester when I realized I'm actually within striking distance, it was very dramatic because the person behind me was very close to me. And
Who was?
both as a friend and in terms of GPA. But the third person was so far away, it was obvious they're not going to catch up. So it was only in the last semester when I became really competitive that, okay, I could be the topper, so I need to do extra well in the last semester just to cross that last line. But till then, I didn't really
Yeah.
care too much about it. It happened. But it was not like I was trying to be the topper of the branch.
Got it. And just looking out of window and that civil construction sparked that curiosity, interest, inclination.
And even now, whenever I cross a construction site, you will always find me taking pictures and looking around at the place. I
Oh
simply
yeah.
love looking at construction.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I like and appreciate, admire about the things you share on social media, like we need more people like you who are passionate about the engineering that they are doing and then share about it. I always see you're sharing tarmac or building or something. I mean, things
Oh
go
yeah.
above my head, but I get a glimpse of, okay, this guy is passionate about it. He's sharing about it.
So I can give you one example. I just told this to my students recently, and I'll leave it for your viewers to figure out why this is true. But say you're in a highway in the middle of nowhere. And you're calling someone and someone is asking you where are you can give them a very, very accurate answer. Like to the meter, you can give them a very accurate answer. It is easier to find your location in the middle of an empty highway than to find your location in the middle of a city. Mapping a city is actually very difficult, and finding your location on a highway by design is extremely easy. But when you're actually driving on a highway, not as an engineer, you don't realize it. That this thing has been so well engineered. If you lose your way, it is ridiculously easy to find it.
But if you're sharing GPS coordinate, why you say highway is easier than a city? Or what is it you're exactly referring to?
So there's something without going into a lot of details. Essentially, if I tell you that, so every highway has its internal coordinate system. Those are the mileposts that you see. You don't realize it, but that's actually been designed to be a coordinate system. So if you're trapped in the middle of a highway, you just say I'm on this highway and I'm at this milepost. That's enough information for anybody to
Okay,
find it. Whereas if you're in the middle of a
got it.
city, GPS is not that accurate. You could be within a cluster of 5 buildings, but those 5 buildings can have 50 rooms in each. So that's
Mhm,
the uncertainty. I'm using technical terms, but the uncertainty of your location is very high within the urban area. Whereas
mhm.
on a highway, you can easily find your location. And again, that's by
Un
design.
Unless it's a highway of Dallas. I mean, if you're using GPS coordinates in Dallas, there's like
No, so,
five
so
highway.
no, but that's what I'm saying. It's even in Dallas or Chicago where you have those heights. Each of those levels has a different designation, and each level
For
has a
highway.
different coordinate system. So all you have to say is which designation are you on and which milepost are you on. That's enough to find your location.
Right,
So
right.
when
So
you
if
design a highway, you don't depend on GPS. You have smarter ways to
right.
do things.
Yeah, if a person is not having GPS, it's way easier. You just tell the highway and the milepost, and it's easier to
So,
locate it.
so
And
for example,
third dimension.
I lived in Pittsburgh last 3 years in the US. So Pittsburgh
Mhm.
is in the Appalachian Mountains. So there's not a lot of good internet phone connectivity over there. So I would drive out for hiking, etc., to various parks, and it was very sure I would not get good signal over there. So I actually became an expert in navigating based on highway mileposts, highway exits, and highway designations. I rarely used my GPS while driving in the middle of nowhere because as long as I knew that this is the highway to take and these are the exits to take, It was no problem at
Hmm.
all navigating. So I must have driven thousands of miles without even needing GPS.
Nice, nice. So I know some people just go, okay, east, west, north, south, directionally on the highways, and they are able to go from one point to another, just
Yeah.
knowing, having a sense of that.
I would say if anybody who happens to live in Pittsburgh, which is a wonderful city, east, west, north, south doesn't work over there. The
Okay.
topography is so complicated, you can't use directions. So there will be a highway which is marked east, it's actually going north. So
For a
when I lived
moment.
in Pittsburgh, I got that sense that, okay, designations and all don't matter that much. Follow the
Okay.
stationing system, the milepost system on the highway. That's a much better way of navigating. And GPS, again, you didn't have any signal over there, so you couldn't even use GPS.
Got it. So in a long run, it's east, but in a local, it might not be east. It might be west, right? So,
So it's complicated, and that's why as highway engineers, which is what I am, we have our
mhm.
own coordinate system that doesn't depend on all this stuff.
Okay. So what coordinate system you
The
have a
mileposts. Okay. Mileposts are not
milepost?
put over there. I mean, they're useful for the drivers. They're actually designed for the engineering and the construction. So if
Got it.
you say I'm on I-75, no, I-75, the correct way to say is I-75 on the left-hand side on milepost number 118 plus 100. As an engineer, I know exactly where you are.
Mm, got it.
So anyway,
I
that's a lot
hope
of engineering. And
viewers are,
Mm,
yeah, I mean, we are engineers, so sometimes, I like to get into technicalities. So coming back,
yes.
IIT, you changed your branch. And then I think the same story. You probably in first year Saranpur, you have your friends. Now you moved into a different campus. But probably, did you mingle with the people who moved from Saranpur to Roorkee, or you make new friends there then?
So initially, all of us were close because we were all like complete outsiders. I remember all of us landed up in Radhakrishnan Bhavan, the RKV, that was the hostel,
Hmm.
and they didn't realize that there were branch change people who needed rooms a lot. So all of us were literally our bags were sitting outside, and we were sitting there and waiting for the warden to come and remember what to do with us. So that was kind of our welcome over there.
Wow.
Oh yeah,
We had
I
a
mean, you know how it works in Roorkee. One office manages branch change, and not Roorkee everywhere. Truly. One office manages the branch change. One office takes care of the housing, but the two don't talk to each
I see.
other.
So
Right.
we had a
So
very competitive process of selecting room. I think there was a lottery system, and based on
yeah.
lottery, everyone is called and you pick your room. So what happened with you
So
guys? There was no room allotted.
there was no room allotted, so the warden had to come and figure out what rooms were left over, and then
Okay.
just randomly. Obviously, there were the worst rooms which nobody wanted. And
Was it on
2 years,
seventh
I think
floor
I was on
or?
the top floor, which is extremely hot, facing inwards, which is extremely boring to look at.
Okay.
But
So
yeah,
that's
that's for 2 years we got that on a story related to this. So that's how we got into Turkey, like not even knowing what room or not even being technically actually there on paper. And
mm,
then we stayed in RKB for 2 years, my batch. And then fourth year, for various reasons, they split us up. So we were put in Jawahar Bhavan, which is traditionally where civil engineering was there. And there, the room allotment, ironically, was based on CGPA, which is very cruel. But because my CGPA was first, I got first pick to all the rooms. So I went from having no choice of which room to take to having a choice of every room to pick from.
wow. Did you pick ground floor then?
No, in Jawahar Bhavan, I had asked my seniors which room has the best Wi-Fi. We didn't have LAN over there. And they told me which one has it, and I picked that one with supreme confidence. And it did have good Wi-Fi.
I see, I see. What was the other half of your branch split into? Because I thought everyone was living in Jawahar from civil.
No, so for the first year was RKV, but I was not. Sorry, first year was Rajendra Bhavan, so I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Second year, all of us, actually, the entire second year was put into RKV. That's
Hmm.
all the branches, and we just continued in third year into RKV. So the entirety of third year was in RKV. In hindsight, that was a bad policy, and I think they've changed it now. And then in fourth year, we got split up into branch. Now they did want to split the branches individually also. But because we were the guinea pig batch that kind of spent 2 years together, they had enough sympathy to at least put all of civil in one branch, all in one hostel, all of mechanical in one hostel, etc.
Yeah.
So in Jawahar, we had
We
architecture and civil, and then we MTech students for civil MTech
got it.
students mainly.
So whole civil was there. That's what I
Yeah,
know. Like they did not split the branch people. All branch were in same hostel, but the
yeah.
whole
They
year was
wanted
split
to.
into different.
They wanted
They
to, but
wanted to.
somehow we convinced them that don't play these terrible games with us. That keep us
Really?
together for so long and then suddenly split us up. So
Were
we
you
stayed in the
were
same
you
hostel at
involved in
least.
that? Were you involved
No,
in that conversation or
no.
okay?
There were people who were trying to get me involved because generally the wardens and the faculty, they knew me and they liked me, I think, to a large extent. So there were people who tried to get me involved. I stayed out. I like whatever. Put me wherever you want. It makes no difference to me.
Oh, so they do take inputs from student. It's maybe like few students because I didn't know that they are taking inputs from student.
It depends on the warden. If the warden wants to, they can. Do they have to? Absolutely not.
Got it. Got it. So when you went into IIT, what was your plan like from second year onwards? So for first year, you were not trying to change brand, you were just trying to do your thing. From second
Yeah.
year onwards, when did the clarity came into your life, like what you wanted to do after you graduate?
So I think one good thing that happened to me, although maybe it's not good, but because I came in second year, I didn't have a lot of friends in the batch. Because you
Mhm.
make friendships in first year. So I didn't have a lot of friends to start with. So the people I interacted more were with seniors and with 1 year junior. But the junior to me was a different issue. But because I interacted with a lot of seniors, I got a lot of good advice from them and a lot of bad advice also. But at least I got some advice from them. And I had one or two seniors who I was very, very close to. We were really, really good friends. And they gave me a lot of insight on what is a career, what's the difference between a job and a career, what is a relaxing job, and is it good or bad, etc. So I got a lot of insight from them. So basically, talking to seniors, I learned a lot about how to think about what to do after you get out of IIT. On my own, I probably wouldn't have thought about it. But from them, and I interacted with them a lot more because I had almost no friends in my batch.
You were like what I recall from our college days is there's two types of topper. One is topper people don't like. To me personally, you were a kind of topper which I feel like people like. You were, not a rude guy. You were just jolly student who's doing well in education, and you were, transmitting some sort of passion, happy, joy kind of student. Whereas I feel some toppers are very they won't share anything that they are doing. I don't know much on
Yeah,
your
I
side. Like,
had no problem talking to people. And certainly I was very well known in the mess to like just sit for like an hour and a half chatting with people. Where my food would be over and all that. And I would still be sitting there and chatting with people. I didn't mind doing that. But the question is, okay, let's say class is over and I could do anything. Who would I be with or what would I be doing? I would mostly be with my seniors, either in Shitij or in the Litsec or whatever. I would mostly
mhm,
spend more time with them. So when I spoke to other people in my batch, they were good friends of mine. They're still good friends of mine. Did
mhm.
I actively go out on my way to try to talk to people in my batch? Not really. Not that much. There are maybe
Got
two
it.
or three people in the whole institute that I actively went out to try to meet and hang out with. And those were the small group of friends that I had.
So those seniors from Shetid or other group, were they civil engineering seniors or just seniors?
One was, so there was Bharati Malakar. He was the topper in civil before me. So he was a very, very good friend of mine, still is a good friend of mine. Others were in, there was mechanical, electrical. Besides Bharati, I didn't know a lot of my civil seniors. No idea why, I just didn't. But in
Got
hindsight,
it.
it was
Got
good that I met seniors from other branches also. Because at least they can't tell you anything about the industry of civil. They'll at least tell you about other career aspects.
it. Mhm. So at what point you decided to do masters? Were you
So I would
clear?
say
Okay, I'm gonna do master.
I would say by the beginning of third year, I was very seriously considering that academia seems like a good career. So one thing I used to at least try to meet professors, right? Not that I would suck up to them or anything like that, but I at least when I looked at professors, I thought, okay, this is a job they're doing. They're not just showing up in class and magically writing stuff on the board. They're busy and they're
Mhm.
doing other things also. So apparently it's a job. So by the end of second year, I got curious. Okay, this is a job. It's something I could also do potentially. And I remember Bharati, who I mentioned again was my senior. He was also thinking about it. That this seems like a nice job to have. So he kind of gave me the idea. I used to speak to my professors about, okay, what kind of career is this? Academia and being a professor. What do you do as a professor besides teaching structural engineering or something like that? And then towards the end of my third year, I did an internship in Munich where I actually started doing a little bit of research, which seemed pretty interesting to me. So that got me into thinking, okay, this seems like an interesting job. So by the time I got into fourth year, I thought, okay, I should get a PhD. So what do you need to become a professor? It's the only career where the minimum qualification is the PhD. PhD doesn't guarantee a job, but not having a PhD guarantees that you can't even apply. So I realized, okay, this job needs a PhD, so I need to get a PhD. Now, why did I get my master's? So I went to UIUC, the University of Illinois, at Urbana-Champaign. And they've changed it now, but their policy then was you cannot apply for the PhD program without a master's. They've changed that now. So I basically applied for the master's program and checked a box that says, yes, I'm also interested for the PhD program. So the master's was incidental, but it was a good experience nonetheless.
Got it. And how about the third year intern? Did you get through one of those programs which gives
Yeah,
you
so
funding for an intern?
DAAD, which they do not like to say
That.
DAD, uh, Deutsch,
Oh, they don't.
Deutsche Austauschdienst, and I forgot what the first A stands for. Because I managed to learn a little bit of German also at that point. So I
Yeah.
could reasonably pronounce it properly. But yeah, DAAD, the German program. So I went to TU Munich. I had a very good professor there who supported me. Munich was an
Mhm.
expensive city, so I wouldn't say the money was all that great, but it was extremely good experience nonetheless.
And how did you learn about that? Was it your seniors informing you about this is a possible thing you can do in third year intern?
Yes, so it was seniors and a small group of people within my batch, Anuj, who you've interviewed before, and a small group of others who we were all kind of similarly inclined in thinking. So it
Hmm.
was between us and between talking to our seniors that not only did we learn about its existence of the program, but how do you apply, what are the steps, how do you write a statement of purpose. Through the seniors and between us, we picked up a lot of information.
Got it. And then up in fourth year, did you sit for placement or were you solely focused on
Yeah, no, I sat for
master?
placements primarily as a backup in insurance policy, I guess.
Hmm.
And I was lucky I got placed on day zero. Of course, well,
Wow.
strictly speaking, it was day one because it was 2 a.m. on day one. Uh, but yeah, the interview started on day zero. So I was very lucky I got placed right on day zero. So I got over with placements from the very first company that I sat. Of course, I didn't join the company, but yeah, as an insurance policy, I did go there. Eventually, I didn't take the job.
So one thing I realized that is very interesting about this podcast is we are very different personalities, and that's where I'm very curious to know your mindset about a lot of things. So I was like 75% student, doing okay in studies, whatever is required I was doing, and then I was a lot into sports. So sports is what I spend a lot of time in. uh, but then few things I would like to know from you would be, one is, as we were talking on, you had a bachelor's and master and PhD, like 10-year roadmap clear in your mind,
Mm-hmm.
which is not usual. I would say maybe very few percentage of people have that long of a roadmap. Other people just do things for 2 years and then see how things go. So how was that experience for you? Did you like that, or was it a long, hard work run for a long path?
So it was definitely a lot of hard work for me. So I was not thinking of in terms of what am I supposed to do for the next 10 years. I was thinking, and I had mentioned previously, seniors had told me the difference between a job and a career. So I wasn't thinking so much as which job I would get, as much as what career do I want. And it so happened that the career I wanted, which was academia, had a 10-year roadmap for it. So certainly if I wanted to be a software engineer, no, I wouldn't have to study for that long. And then I would land the first job, and then from first job, you diverge elsewhere. So the long roadmap as such, it was obvious. Once I knew what career I wanted, the roadmap was pretty much clear. Was it hard? Absolutely. A PhD is a very, very hard degree to get. And I had a wonderful PhD advisor who's still a good friend of mine who I still respect greatly. He helped me a lot. I would never have gotten this far without him. So it was hard, but it was very enriching. I would say now that I am a professor, it's a different type of thing because I got my career. Now it's a question of what to do with it. I'm not sure I entirely know the answer yet.
Got it. So how would you explain difference between job and career? You refer to this point. Can you speak for that? What's the difference between those?
Yeah, I would say for those who play chess or are interested in military history, the correct terminology is a job is tactical and a career is strategic. In the sense, a career is what field do you do, what general work type of work do you do, and a job is specific to where you work. So a job is related to an employer, or it could be a startup or a company. But a career is related to what general field of work or what type of work or what skills you use. So you can have the same career in different jobs, and you could have you could have the same job, or you could have multiple jobs in multiple careers because you kind of change your strategic goal.
Got it. So after during first year, you saw from the window civil engineering. So there's one thing is what you see and what it actually is. So during second year, did you get a flavor of what it actually is, and then did you liked it and you were like, yeah,
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say I generally liked it. So the thing is, civil engineering is not one field. We kind of people from outside civil just call it civil. Within civil, civil actually doesn't mean much. So civil has, I think Anuj had mentioned this, some pretty big categorizations between them. So the biggest of them is structural engineering, which is related to buildings, basically. But it's also related to a lot of mechanics. So a lot of the mathematics in civil engineering comes out of structural engineering. I would say it's the oldest field of study after architecture. So structural engineering kind of came out of architecture. So our second year classes were mostly devoted to more mechanics of sorts. And yeah, I found them interesting. I found the professors were a mixed bag. And now, as a professor, I can definitely say the quality of teaching seriously affects your level of interest. So I would say structural engineering, although I did extremely well in all the classes, I didn't find it too interesting. It was only way out in third year when we had so there's a particular area called transportation engineering. And we had some really good professors at IIT Roorkee who were still at IIT Roorkee, who taught transportation engineering. And they made me think that, okay, civil engineering is fine, but within civil, this particular area seems good because there seem to be really good professors who are able to teach me very nicely in it. So that's kind of how I further narrowed down civil broadly. So nobody works in civil engineering. You work in a particular field of civil engineering.
yeah, got it. And when you were doing your PhD, were you or masters, you wanted to go into this transportation
Yeah, so
engineering
in
field?
masters generally, even in here, you have to declare which field. So you don't get admitted to a master's in civil engineering. There's no such thing. Although the degrees are civil engineering, you actually get admitted within a particular specialization. And that's true in IIT Gandhinagar, for example. So I actually applied to masters in civil engineering with a specialization in transportation engineering. That's kind of the full title or what it's applied to. And then PhD is similar, but PhD, it's more understood that you're admitted to a professor or to an advisor and not strictly in a particular area. The advisor has an area, but you are more associated with the professor than the program.
Got it. So when you were doing your PhD, did you wanted to do professor in US or India? You went back to India, IIT Gandhinagar. How was that decision made? What
Yeah,
point it
it's a
was
very good
made?
question, and it's a question a lot of people struggle with. I would say my ultimate goal was I wanted a a professor's job, which many people do not realize, is a very stressful job. It's also a job that doesn't give you a lot of mobility. So, in the sense, in industry, for example, you start in one job, it is very likely you could actually go up to a bigger company based on your experience. In academia, if you start at a smaller university, bigger ones are almost shut for you. Like for the rest of your career, it's almost impossible to go up. And the simple reason is the expectations are so much higher at larger universities. And smaller universities don't have the resources to help you meet those expectations. That your output is so low, you are not competitive anymore in the job market. So the key for me, it was never about whether I wanted to go to the US or in India. The question was, where can I get the best opportunity to go to a large university where I can get whatever support I needed to do the kind of research I wanted to do. So I applied both US and India. In the US, I didn't get any great universities and large enough from my perspective. In India, I did. And so That's how I came back. So it was nothing to do with which country. It was never really, I didn't really care too much which country. It was more about what is the best opportunity I can get, knowing that upward mobility is very high, very low in this field.
Got it. So best opportunity you can get in US or India, or did you
Exactly.
also look out for colleges outside these two countries?
I had applied to Canada, I remember, but Canada has its own weird thing about Canadian experience and all that stuff. They're not very open to people who haven't lived in Canada. And no, I didn't apply to Europe. European academia works very differently. Literally, the whole structure of universities and all is very different over there. And if you haven't been in that system, you kind of won't even understand that system. So mostly I stuck, and the Indian system is closer to the US system than to the European system. So I mostly, with a little bit of Canada, I mostly stuck to US and India for applications.
Got it. So what's the process of becoming a professor? Like you apply as you apply in masters, you submit your SOP and everything, you give an exam, or how does it work out
Oh,
if
no,
you
no.
want to
It
become
is
a
far
prof?
more complicated than that. I wish it were just an exam, but it's definitely not. It is much more subjective. So, first of all, you have to have minimum qualifications. So, the minimum qualification is a PhD. So, if you don't have a PhD, don't bother. But PhD is not enough. You must also have a decent number of papers, and decent depends on the eyes of the beholder. But you must have a decent number of papers in high quality journals published. You must, so that's kind of the minimum requirement. That if you can't put this on your application, you're not even going to get an interview. Now, you may still not get an interview because, in addition, you have to write something called a research statement. And this is a complicated thing to write. So, a research statement for a faculty position, essentially, you have to explain what research are you going to pursue at least for the next 10 years. So, obviously, if it's something like, hey, I did X test in my PhD, and now I want to do X plus one test in as a professor, yeah, that won't get you a job. uh, you need to think, okay, I have worked in this broad field in my PhD. I want to expand it. Starting from this broad field, I want to expand it in another different direction. And these are the resources I require. These are the kind of students that I'll have. These are the kind of publications I expect to have. So you kind of have to explain it as a 10-year, again, it's not a contract. You can change as things go on. But your research statement has to explain for the next 10 years what is the broad kind of research you're going to pursue and what resources you need for that. Resources being labs, computers, etc., and students.
Got it. So how
And
big is
and you have to
this?
pay a little bit of lip service to teaching. So you kind of have to write a teaching statement where you explain your teaching philosophy. I would say it's important, but it's not super critical. Like you don't have to be a very good teacher to get hired.
Got it. So that research statement, is it 2 pages or 10
Yeah, so
pages? How
it depends, 2 to 3 pages. It shouldn't be so short that it looks like that you're not doing anything. It shouldn't be so long that nobody will read it because there's not a lot of time to read all this stuff. Because at universities, the professors are also doing the hiring, so we are also the HR managers. So
hmm,
we don't have a lot of time to read long statements. So it does shouldn't be very long. A key mistake a lot of people make, they spend like half the research statement talking about what they did in the past. A lot of details. Like I did this experiment, I published here. That's a bad statement. A research statement is supposed to be forward looking, not backward looking. A CV is backward looking. So a lot of space is wasted just explaining what they did in the back.
got it. And how is do they have a special portal where you upload your resume, CV, research statement, teaching a statement, PhD, all those docs, and then
So I say
there's
it's
no exam?
no, there's no, well, a PhD, you meet the minimum qualification, so that's a PhD. Now, I will add this is for engineering faculty positions in India. If you're trying to get a faculty position outside of engineering in the humanities, then I think it's slightly different. And if you're trying to get a faculty position without a PhD, which is just kind of in a lectureship of sorts, then there is an exam for it. But if it's engineering with a PhD, there's no exam. And yeah, there's an ad. So there are actually job boards for academia, like for every other industry. There are ads, there are websites. They tell you what to fill in, deadlines, and all that. It's pretty much like applying to any job.
Got it. And how competitive is it? The ratio, how many people apply to how many actually get the job?
Yeah, I'll give you two numbers. So when I was a postdoc at the University of Pittsburgh, so after my PhD for 3 years, I was a postdoc. Many of you viewers might not know what that is. So postdoctoral research associate, postdoc. That's kind of, you're a researcher, but you're not a professor. So you're not a student, but you're not a professor. You're somewhere in between. So I was a postdoc in the University of Pittsburgh for 3 years. There was a particular call that I knew the dynamics going on behind it. It was something of the order of 300 people applied for one position. And they all met the minimum requirements, like PhD and papers and all that. Everybody had it. 300 applied, and I think three got an interview, and none got hired in the end. That's one statistic. Another statistic is here at IIT Gandhinagar. I've sat through many of these interview processes. I would say something. If we get 10 applications in a month, we reject 9 of them immediately upon reading. So them out of 10, there might be one that we bother to interview. And of the ones that we interview, again, it's something like 9 out of 10 we would reject at the interview stage. So it is highly, highly competitive. And I say 9 and 10 is indicative. We actually get many more than that in a month. So it is a very highly competitive field to get a job at a higher ranked institution. Smaller places are also competitive, but not this competitive.
So this application, is it continuous throughout the year, or is there a fall hiring, spring hiring, like
So
that?
it depends. So in the US, they tend to have a fall hiring. In India, some IITs tend to also have a fall or spring hiring time. Some other places like IIT Gandhinagar have what's called a rolling ad. So it's just open throughout the year. So you really have to check the individual. And there are some universities which have kind of stopped hiring for a few years because they don't have any positions. So it's not like they're always hiring either. So you kind of have to check every year, okay, who's open, who's hiring. And even in hiring, they will tell you that we are interested in these particular things. Like in civil, we are looking for someone in transportation or someone in hydro. And we are not looking for someone in structural. So you kind of have to look specifically what exactly are they looking for. In the US, it tends to be even more specific, that they tell you it's not just transportation, but someone working in autonomous vehicles and sustainable payments or something like that. They'll be very, very specific. So it's not that you can apply to every job which opens either. It's only a small subset that you can actually apply to.
And how is the interview process?
So interview tends to consist of 3 parts. So there will be a teaching seminar. So that's just teach some students and don't make a fool of yourself, basically. There is a research interview, and the research interview has 2 parts. So one is what have you done in the past, and the second is what are you going to do in the future. So what's your research proposal? And the teaching one is okay. Like teaching, we're just checking that do you know the basics and can you speak to a group of undergraduates? It's not particularly difficult to clear. The research interview is tough because most candidates tend to talk about what they did and not why they did it. And you drill down deep enough, and the answer is that, well, my advisor told me to do it, that's why I did it. And that's when you get rejected. So it is a tough interview, and then there's the research proposal interview, which is the hardest interview. Because not only do you have to propose what you're doing for the next 10 years, you have to answer a lot of criticizing, and criticizing, I say in a positive way, a lot of critical questions, I guess is the word. You have to answer a lot of critical questions from people who are trying to prove that your plan is bad and it won't work. So you have to convince a very critical audience that you actually can do what you're saying you're going to do.
Hmm.
So
Got it.
it's
So
a
the
tough process.
teaching seminar is what? You teach one seminar and your
Yeah,
professors are
basically 1 hour.
viewing it?
1 hour, pick up a topic from an undergraduate curriculum, just teach any lecture.
Teach to whom? To real students or
Yeah,
just a
students.
professor?
No, students. I mean, professors are also there because they're evaluating you. But
Okay.
yeah, teach to students, answer their questions.
So I was never in such class. So when are these classes occurring? When a
So the thing is,
teaching
even
seminar is
here,
happening?
we put the ads out there. Everybody knows when they're there. Students just don't bother coming. I mean, think about this way. In Roorkee, I know we had those notice boards and all that stuff. Nobody
Yeah.
used to read them. So, and particularly if
Okay.
it's a department notice board, then nobody read it at all.
Okay. So it's
But
on
these
department
announcements would be
notice.
everywhere.
Okay.
Like here
Got
at
it.
IIT Gandhinagar, we do stuff by email. So emails go out, multiple emails go out. This faculty candidate is coming. They're doing a teaching session. This is the place, this is the time, this is the topic. All students
Okay.
are welcome. Nobody comes.
Got it. Okay, I see. So that's where you see how good, maybe not the best, but at least should be able to impart knowledge to students, able to
Yeah,
speak
so,
in
so for
front of
the
big
teaching
audience.
seminar, the expectations are reasonably kept. Like,
Hmm.
do you seem to know the basics in a simple topic, undergraduate topic, and can
Hmm.
you teach it to students reasonably well? You don't have to
Got
be
it.
a great professor who's going to inspire everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You should just be confident enough to speak in front of an
Got.
audience.
And research interview is more about what you did. Proposal is about what you plan to do,
What you plan to
tenure.
do. Mhm.
And how many people are taking interview? Is it the same set of professors? Like if you're hiring someone, you would ask some of your colleagues to help you with the hiring process, or is there a
So
systematic way?
So generally, there will be a committee, or at least three faculty, because that's the minimum to do it. So there is a hiring committee, but then you will generally also pull people who are in that as close to that specialization as possible. So if you have a faculty who's in earthquake, if you have a candidate who's in earthquake engineering, and you have a faculty who knows a little bit about dynamics, or at least teaches dynamics, you'd want to have that person at least sitting during the interview or during the presentation, so that there's a little bit of a subject domain expertise in that. Because the truth is, research is so specialized, we can't know everything. So certainly they can, and many times it happens, there are candidates who seem to have done good work and I can't understand a word of what they're saying. So, but then you have to know there are ways to ask questions where you may not know the right answer, but you can judge a good answer from a bad answer.
Got it. So those three or maybe more, three, four professors
So beyond that, you
taking.
have individual interactions. So one-on-one interviews, as we call them, they're primarily answering. So those are kind of reverse interviews. It's more to answer the candidates' questions than to our questions. And I would say a vanishingly tiny number of people actually get to that stage.
Okay, got it. And how long is this research interview and proposal interview? 1 hour, 2 hour,
Generally 1 hour each.
1 hour each.
So
Okay.
you'll get about 1 hour to do each.
So if I am a candidate, 1 hour of lecture, 1 hour of research, 1 hour of proposal, 3 hours where I need to give my best, and especially the proposal piece seems to have a higher weightage than the
Yep.
research and teaching. Teaching seems like have the minimum weightage. Like okay,
Yeah,
if
it's not.
you
I won't say it's zero or not that teaching is not important, but yeah, if
yeah.
it doesn't have to be the best.
Got it. So this is very important for students to know. I think this is something students don't know because students coming from 11th, 12th, IIT, JEE preparation, there the faculties are like really good at teaching, really good at imparting knowledge. And then coming to
Yeah,
IIT where the main focus of professor is to do research. And as a side, supporting institute, they are teaching as well. Like teaching is not the primary goal of a professor.
yeah. Now I say so. You correctly said this is for an IIT or for a research institution. There are teaching institutions where, for example, at IIT Gandhinagar, it's similar across the IITs. You essentially have to teach 3 units per year. Now, there's a way of calculating units, but it's roughly you can say you have to teach 3 courses per year, spread over 2 semesters. So you can do 2+1, 1+2, 1.5 plus 1.5. There's a way to calculate that. Whereas in teaching colleges, smaller ones, I know faculty who teach 4 classes per semester, which means it's 8 per year. So our expectation is 3, and their expectation is 8. And so you can obviously, if you're teaching 4 classes, you're not doing any research. There is no way you can do research after teaching 8 classes. So expectations are set accordingly.
Got it. So what are these teaching institute? Can you give some examples?
Any of the smaller private colleges in India or in the US, what are called SLACs, small liberal arts colleges, or or community colleges, for example, where their primary goal is teaching. They may pay lip service to research or they may actually do a little bit of research, but 90% of your time goes into teaching.
Okay. So IITs are research institute, like
So
people are going there to do research.
So IITs until I'd say the 2000s were teaching institutes, and places like IISc and TIFR were research institutes. Uh, that changed in the last 20 years, and the IITs are also expected to be research institutes. So you can actually see if you look at faculty hired in the 2000s versus faculty hired before that, you can see a difference in their profiles in terms of research intensity, in terms of out publications, etc. You see a difference because the expectations were different between the two. So, as an example, I'm an assistant professor. After assistant professor, the next position is an associate professor. So, and maybe 50 years ago or 40 years ago, how do you become an associate professor? You teach a class, you get some good feedback, and you become an associate professor. Today, well, you need to finish a research project, you need to have at least one PhD student, at least 3 papers published. And you should teach just check that off that you should teach something. So the expectations for promotion and hiring are also different now than what they were even 20 years ago.
Hmm. So what changed in 2000s that IITs like overall then became more of a research institute?
I would say it's a good question. I would say the country started getting richer. For the longest time, we were just a poor country with a big population. 2000 onwards, the IT boom happened. I think it was in 2007 that India became $1 trillion economy. So then the idea started, okay, we need to start competing with bigger countries. Like it's not good enough to compete with just the subcontinent. We need to compete with other countries. And then when you look at and other countries, prime usually means the West or Japan. So when people start looking at that and seeing, okay, what are their universities like and what are our universities like? And it's like, okay, those universities tend to be research focused, ours are teaching focused. And so all we do is copy paste new information from them and teach it to our students, but we're not creating any new information. So it was then, I guess, when we as Indians realized that we could actually compete with other countries and beat them in many cases. That's when a lot of changes happened. One of them was to convert the IITs into more research focused institutions than purely teaching institutions.
Got it. Very fascinating. And was it like driven by some one person or PM or someone or
Well, the government certainly has a large role to play, but it's something that it kind of picks up a mind of its own. So once you hire enough faculty who have a strong research motivation and research background, they kind of influence other faculty. Like, hey, look, I don't, it's not that I don't care, but okay, you taught 2 classes, good for you. I got 2 PhD students graduated. And there's kind of this social pressure that I've done better than you because I got PhD students graduated. So, salary actually doesn't change too much based on that. Your salary is largely a function of how long you've been around. But the kind of prestige that you get, the social pressure, that moved away from being based on teaching to being based on research. And accordingly, everything moved. Of course, the government had a large role to play in providing the infrastructure and the enabling mechanism for this. But once you have enough people, it starts taking a life of its own.
got it? So how are you in the professor circle with do you guys look at okay, he has 20 PhDs and these many papers. What are some of the criterias you look at when you're talking about the prestige?
So, number of papers and the quality of papers. So, there are some what are called predatory journals, which are just junk journals that you pay them some money and they publish anything basically. And that's a serious problem in India and many other countries. Mostly in the IITs, we don't do that. And then there are good journals. Now, good journals depends on your particular field. So, in my particular field, there's a journal called the International Journal of Pavement Engineering. It's so specific that I think in most IITs you might have 2 people who can publish in it and no more than that because it's so specific as an area. But it's a very prestigious journal nonetheless. So what is the prestigious journal depends on what you do. But yes, the how many papers have you published in and what is the quality of the venues that you've published them at? How many PhD students have you trained and graduated? Where did those students go? What did they go on to do in their lives? A little bit in terms of teaching, like generally, how have your teaching scores been? Are you seen as a good teacher or a not very good teacher by students in general? That has a lower weight, but it's still something. And then the third thing we do as professors is service, which is you sit on a whole bunch of committees and you act as an administrator for the institution while also being a professor at the institution. That is something which is appreciated. Like it's a good thing to do. And then there's also outreach. So what are international societies are you a part of? What conferences have you organized? Have you been a speaker at some conference or something like that? So there are a number of things that you look at to see the performance of an individual.
Got it. It's as you said earlier, it's a very busy job. I think students from student perspective, you don't realize it. From student perspective, it seems like you're teaching me a course. Teach me nicely. So what are some things you like criticized as a student about professor, and once you became professor, you realize like I was not thinking right or
Yeah, it's a good question. I have a very specific answer to that. So there is a professor at IIT Roorkee, Professor Parida, very good person. I took a elective course with him in my 4th year, and I didn't like his course too much because he was kind of teaching only the overview. Like he was giving us an idea of how things work, but expecting us to figure a lot of stuff out in the way. So he wouldn't solve any problems. He would give us, okay, this is the general approach to doing something like this. Now you go figure out how to solve the actual problems. Back then, I thought, okay, what kind of way is this to teach? I'm not learning anything in your class. Now, as a professor, I realized that was a very good way to teach and also a very risky way to teach. Because you are kind of putting the onus of learning on the student, which is the correct thing to do. But then the flip side of that is some students may not get it and they may not end up learning anything at all. So you have to be willing to take the risk that you are teaching in a way where some students will do extremely well and some will just completely bomb, as opposed to kind of trying to teach to the medium. So that's something I learned over time. That there are good ways to teach and there are bad ways to teach. And students don't always understand the difference.
Got it. And when you're setting papers, examination papers, uh, do you intentionally sometimes as a professor set it very hard or easy or medium, or is it just personality of different teachers, or is there a conscious effort on how do they want their test to be?
So there is a way to do it. So as I alluded in the beginning, there's something called Bloom's taxonomy. So Bloom's taxonomy is kind of a system of learning. So it tells you that, okay, for example, if I ask you a question and you ask me, okay, is this an easy question or a hard question? So as a concrete example, if I ask you, okay, what is the value of pi to 4 decimal places, right? 3.1415. Now, if I ask you, is that an easy question or a hard question? There you go to Bloom's taxonomy, and Bloom's taxonomy has 6 levels of learning. So the lowest level of learning is recollecting facts, like just something you memorized and then you just gobble it out onto paper. That's the lowest level. And the highest level is creating new knowledge. So when you are trying to make an exam, you kind of have to see, okay, where do the questions fall somewhere in this Bloom's taxonomy? So maybe you should have 10-20% of questions which are just recollecting a bunch of facts, or or maybe not. Maybe that's not something you should do. There is a slightly higher level where you're applying a formula. So you have a formula, everything on the right hand side is given, and you solve for the left hand side. That's a slightly higher level. You have some questions over there. And then you may want to have some questions where students are trying to synthesize knowledge. So you learned one skill in problem one skill in problem two. Now I'm asking you to combine the two skills in a completely new problem and solve a different problem using the skills from there. So the challenge there is the student can solve the two problems separately if they studied for it, but that does not mean they can connect the two techniques into a single problem. So in fact, in I just conducted my final exam for my class 2 weeks back. I put a question exactly like that, where individually the students could completely solve the problem on their own. When I combined it together, I know it was a 25-mark question, and the average on that question was 6. And that was on purpose. So it was designed to be a seriously tough question. I will still say there was one student who got 22 out of 25 on that question. So these are the questions that really show the difference in learning outcomes. But when you're making an exam, if you're doing it scientifically, you can always do it just based on what you want. That's a different way of doing it. But if you're doing it scientifically, you kind of have to look at it in terms of Bloom's taxonomy and see what percentage of the exam falls into different levels of learning. Knowing that the lower levels are easier, the higher levels are harder. So that's how you decide whether a question or an exam is easy or hard. And same thing goes for assignments or projects.
Got it. And how do you grade? Is it a normal bell curve where you give specific students A plus, or is it whoever gets above 80 gets A plus? How is the grading
Yeah, so
there?
I never do the last one. Absolute grading. The reason, so my logic is if I do absolute grading, I have to make an exam such that somebody can get above an 80, right? Well, that's too much. That's hard. To design an exam where you can pinpoint what marks some students will get is pretty difficult to do, because you just don't know how the students are going to behave to that exam. I use a variation of the first one. So the first one, what you call is relative grading, which is you essentially have a bell curve, and you kind of up to one standard deviation you put something, and two standard deviations you put something else. I use a variation of it, which my PhD advisor taught me, called cluster grading. So the idea is I calculate the marks and then I look for clusters within the marks. That okay, these two students seem to be way above everybody else, so these two get the highest grade. Now I look at the remaining; these three seem to be higher than the remaining, so they get the next grade. So I try to create clusters. I could use k-means clustering or something of that sort, but I just do it visually. You kind of try to create clusters and assign grades accordingly. So it is relative, but it's not a formula kind of relative. There's a bit of subjectivity in that, which I think is a good thing when it comes to teaching.
Okay, so in this relative scale, is it also these are performing really bad, so they need to be failed, or how is that criteria?
Yeah, failing students is tough. You ideally you don't want to fail students. Well, there are two reasons you don't want to fail students. One reason you don't want to fail students is because have they really done that badly? It's a big judgment call to say that they've done so badly they need to do this whole course again. And the practical reason you don't want to fail students is you don't want them again next year because you might fail them, but you'll have to teach them again, and it's your headache starting over. So generally, you try to avoid fail grades unless it's really serious. So I say the F grade is kind of a special grade which is kept aside, and the A grade is also a special grade which is given only to like really good students. Everything else, you basically start from the top and just start assigning grades as you go down. It could be that you finish by the time you reach a B minus, you're done, and you don't have any more grades to hand out. Okay, nobody got a C in that class. It's fine.
Okay, so from academic system perspective, there is no requirement that you need to give these percentage, this grade. It's up to professor, however they want to grade. They can give A plus to everyone, they can fail everyone, like, or
So,
is there
so
a
it depends on the institution. At IIT Gandhinagar, the professor is the king of their course. They can do whatever they want within reason. Like if you're failing everybody, then yeah, the dean might ask you what's going on. But as long as you're following a reasonable approach, nobody questions you. Some places have more formulaic. They assign exact things that everybody has to follow. The good thing with the IITs is most IITs we are independent of any regulator. Like we self-regulate essentially, which means we can come up with our own ways of doing things. That could mean you come up with an absolute grading scheme or a relative grading scheme, but it can also mean you can be more creative and come up with something else. But as an institution, each IIT has the ability to set their own policies. And at Gandhinagar, we just said, we essentially leave it to the professor and let them use their sense on how to grade the class.
got it? And how is the effort in terms of creating a course? Because it seems a lot when you are creating a course to teach, it's a lot of work. And
It,
do you need to teach new courses every semester, or are you okay? I have these courses, I'm going to teach these again and again.
so right now, I just started a year ago as an assistant professor. So I'm basically teaching, developing all my courses. So I'm also the only faculty here in transportation engineering because IIT Gandhinagar is a newer IIT, so we don't have the full repertoire. So because I'm the first faculty in transportation engineering, I have to develop all the courses from zero, effectively. So certainly for the last 1 year, a lot of my time goes into developing course materials. Even now, I try to be at any point of time. I try to be 1 month ahead of the course, which is if today you ask me to teach the lecture on January 31st, I have everything set to teach the lecture on January 31st. I try to keep it up in that way, but eventually that's kind of an initial thing as you're starting out. The general idea is you should try teaching the same course for 5 to 6 years because every year you iterate a little bit on it. It takes less effort, but you iterate a little bit and try to improve it. And then when you think, okay, I've done this enough times that more or less I'm doing the same thing year after year, that's a good point to try to teach a different course and let someone else pick up this course instead.
And you share material of what you taught to the new professor, or they just need to create their own?
No, usually nobody has any issues. You share it with the new one. Generally, at least for me, I don't directly use material from anyone else because it usually doesn't conform to my teaching style. So I would use it and to understand generally what concepts to be taught, what are the topics to cover. But I prefer taking ownership of my classes. That my lectures are my lectures, my assignments are mine, my exams are mine. So I take responsibility for what is taught and what is conducted in the class.
Got it. So when you joined IIT Gandhinagar, all the courses that you're teaching now, are they new courses or they were taught by some other professor earlier?
So my portfolio of courses ideal basically is four. It can change, but I have four courses which I teach. Three are in my core area of transportation engineering, which did not exist before I taught. So I teach them from zero. And so I had to develop all the materials from them. The fourth course I teach is finite element methods, which is more of a math course, really, an engineering mathematics course of sorts. So that was taught by another colleague previously, and they were nice enough to share notes with me. But I did make the effort to kind of redo a lot of things. So much so that my TA complained that I'm teaching so differently from last time, he's not able to solve the assignments. So I had to give him the solutions for the assignments. It was a little embarrassing.
I see, I see. So about the three courses that are new, did you influence the institute that we should teach these courses? How does a new course comes into existence?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the mechanics of it are actually relatively simple. You kind of propose a course. So when you propose a course, you propose the learning outcomes. You propose the topics and you propose the references that you teach. And there's a little form you fill up, you circulate it among the faculty, you pass it on to the Senate. The Senate is kind of the highest academic body in the institution. So the Senate then looks at it, gives you feedback, and asks you to update it. And that's basically the mechanics of a new course. Now, if you're proposing a new course which exists in most other institutions, so the courses I teach in transportation, every IIT with a transportation professor, every university with a transportation professor has these courses. So it was not controversial in the sense that, oh, this is a radically new course and nobody will be interested or there's no point teaching it. I didn't have that issue. But certainly some professors do try to once in a while propose some radical courses. That this is something which is not taught anywhere and is not seen as part of a curriculum almost anywhere, but it should be taught. There you have to do a little more heavy lifting and you have to convince your colleagues that it's worthwhile including this in the curriculum. And then it's also a question of where in the curriculum you want to place it. So my courses, which I proposed and it was accepted, they, because they're fundamental courses, they are actually part of the core curriculum, which means that everybody has to take it. So the UG students have to take my UG course, the graduate students have to take my graduate courses if they want to get that degree. But you could also propose elective courses. So elective courses have a lower bar because the idea is if it's really useful, students will take it. And if it's not useful, after 2 or 3 years, you'll just stop offering it.
Hmm.
So it depends whether you're proposing a core course or elective course, how difficult it is to get it through.
And how is the credits assigned to a course? Is this going to be 3 credit course, 4 credit course?
Yeah, so in terms of credits, the general formula we follow in India, US is slightly different, but in India we follow this LTP formation, which is that there are lectures, there are tutorials, and there are practicals. Generally, every hour that you have a lecture counts for 1 credit, and every hour that you have a tutorial or a lab counts as half a credit. And then PG courses tend to have higher credits than UG courses because the lectures are seen to be of higher quality uh, than UG courses. Hour per week, exactly. Per week, right? So, for example, if the course has 2 lectures per week and 1 tutorial, that gets you to 2.5 credits. Two into 1 plus 1 2.5, and 2.5 you just round it off to 3. So that's how you put it at 3 credits.
Got it. So you're using generous ceiling function to give credits in
Yeah,
a
so it's
sense.
not that complicated actually. To assign
Yeah.
credits is a relatively simple formula to
Got
assign. And if it's a PG course, then even 3 hours might become a 4 credit course.
it.
With the understanding there's a project or a lot of self-study involved in the process.
And it would seem like it's almost very difficult to add or delete any course from the first year curriculum because it's very, common across universities. Maybe in second to fourth year in your department, it's easier to add a course, but in first year, it seem like might be very
I
difficult.
think it depends on the institution. So IIT Gandhinagar regularly experiments with first year courses because the philosophy is don't teach a lot of core engineering in first year. Teach problem solving skills and critical thinking in first year. And second year onwards, you can get to core engineering. So problem solving and critical thinking is things you can play around with. You can propose different type of courses for them. Once you get into core engineering, it's a little harder to change courses because there's an expectation from employers that, well, you should have taken at least structural mechanics and at least solid mechanics or structure analysis. So there's like a non-significant list of courses which everybody is expected to take if you have a degree in mechanical or in civil, etc. And then you can only play around with the electives really, as opposed to the core courses.
Got it. So as a maybe department of head who's looking at overall curriculum, they are making sure students learn, they are ready for research as well, they get exposure to industry as well. Like they need to consider a lot of elements to design the whole program.
Right. So those are multiple things we look at. So there are some courses like second year courses where, well, it's just a matter of learning the basics. Like even before you can get a job, you should know the language. You should know what a bending moment is. You should know what a shear force diagram is. Like if you don't know this stuff, you're not going to get a job. Then when you get to higher, like third or fourth year, yeah, you start doing some projects. You start learning some critical thinking in your area, so you can actually solve some useful problems. So it's a gradation on which you learn.
Got it. So now if you talk about a life of professor, can you give us a walkthrough of a day in a life of a professor? How does a typical day looks like?
Yeah. So it's busy is the short answer. Because you're doing a lot of things. So classes are something that are kind of in your schedule and you can't move them. Right. So if you have a 10 a.m. lecture, you have to be there. And if there is an assignment which you have to give tomorrow, it has to be tomorrow, it can't be the day after tomorrow. Right? So lectures are on your schedule as kind of very heavy blocks, which you must be there at all costs. So, and you have no, once you know which classes you're teaching, there is no way to wiggle your way around that. Then the other things you do are research and service. So service is relatively easy. It depends which committees you're sitting on and does the committee have a meeting that week or not. Generally, it's light. It's not a lot. It can be a lot of work when they're doing something, but most of the time they're not doing anything. So there's not a lot of, on average, there's not a lot of work. Research is what takes the largest amount of time. And for research, a large part of it, the way I do it at least, is to have meetings with students. So the meetings are not exams for students. It's just to make sure they're staying on track and try to clarify a couple of things for them, maybe give them a couple of ideas on what they could try. But it's important to meet for half an hour to 1 hour weekly. So you can imagine that if you have 10 students and you meet them 10 hours, 1 hour per week, that's kind of 10 hours in a week, which is blocked off for research meetings. Then a lot of time goes into writing research proposals. That's the toughest one. So whenever there's a call open for a proposal, if it's a single proposal, it's a single PI proposal, that's still reasonably doable. If it's a multiple PI proposal, which is the case for most proposals, you have to reach out to people, you have to collaborate, you have to talk. What are the expectations for different people in the proposal? You have to write it. You have to develop a budget, which is significantly complicated. Develop that. And then whatever time you have left goes into developing new curriculum or changing your slides or preparing for classes. So even when a professor goes to a class, they've prepared at least an hour before that, just to know what they're teaching in the class that day. So that's basically what most of the time goes. There'll be a couple of extra things, like if you're faculty advisor for some student group, okay, the student wants to meet you once in a while. That's minor stuff that does exist. So teaching, research, and service are basically the biggest things, of which in a given week, teaching and research take comparable amounts of time, and service takes less time.
Got it. And how are you working? Is it like morning 7, evening 5? You have a fixed working hours, or it depends on professors? Some work late night, some work early morning.
Yeah, so the best thing about this job is there are no working hours. You don't have to sign in anywhere. Nobody even knows. If there's an expectation that you should be in your office 40 hours per week, but not which 40 hours per week. So sometimes I do come in at 7 if I need to. Particularly if there's like a morning class or a viva or something in the morning, yeah, I'll come in early. Sometimes I'll come in later, maybe 9 or even 9:30 or 10. And sometimes I leave by 6. Those are good days. Sometimes I have left as late as midnight at some points. Those are tough, those particular days. But on average, maybe 6 or 7 I would leave. Sometimes I don't work on weekends. Many times I end up having to come in and do something on weekends. So there are no fixed timings. It's pretty dynamic. A lot of it depends on you. That if you really insist not to work on weekends, it's possible. But then you're going to have to pick up a lot of slack during the week. So you'll be working a lot during the week.
Got it. Is it common professors working over weekends, or
Yeah,
it
it's
depends?
pretty common. Particularly assistant professors, because then you're kind of starting up everything. It's pretty common.
Got it. And now, as a professor, do you make clusters of students when you're teaching? Because you have sincere students who are coming to every class. Then you have average students. Then you have those backbenchers who are just there to do mockery, fun, not interested, not coming to class. How do you view them now?
Yeah, so as professors, you can, within a week, you'll know which student is what kind. So you definitely have a categorization of students and you know who they are. Does it affect your teaching and evaluation? Probably not. Does it affect how you interact with the student outside of the class? Yes, it does. So, for example, if I have a student who seemed uninterested in my class, even if they did well in the class, so performance and the interest in class are not necessarily the same thing. But if I have a student who never spoke to me in class, I don't even remember the name, and then they come and ask me, okay, can I do an internship or can I get a recommendation letter? My answer would be that I probably no, basically, because I don't know you, I have no idea what you do, even if you did well in my class. Whereas if there's a student who did okay in the class but seemed pretty interactive, someone whose name I could remember, for example, yeah, and they would ask me, okay, I'm writing an SOP for masters. can you review it? I would probably review it for them. But while you're in class, you don't get, although there's a judgment on who you are, evaluation doesn't vary based on that. It's kind of post classroom things, outside classroom things that this has an effect on.
Got it. And do you feel, what do you feel about backbenchers? You feel sympathized, like, guys, you should focus, this is where you can learn a lot, or you just think backbenchers are backbenchers, they are like this, you just accept it?
So I would say, well, if they're a kind of backbencher who's interrupting class and making it difficult for me to do my job, then I would have a strong negative attitude to them. But if they're just sleeping in the back, do I care? No, I honestly don't. If they can learn on their own and do well, good for them, in fact. If they are doing badly and sleeping in class, well, it's their life, it's their degree. It's not for me to judge what they do. So I guess the short answer to the backbenchers, as long as they're not a nuisance, I don't think about them that much. Just they exist. That's it.
Got it. And do you recognize some special students, maybe someone who has that exceptional ability, who has impressed you a lot? Do you try to do something, give them guidance, going out of your way?
So I would say I won't take the name, but there was a student, not in my branch, but she's actually applying for positions in the US. And she spoke to me for an hour. Basically, she wanted help with statements and such. She impressed me so much with the maturity with which she spoke and the maturity with which she was able to explain what she's doing and why she's doing. Then she had asked me, okay, can you review my CV? Can you review my SOP? Which take time, and I'm busy, so it's quite an ask to take an hour out to do this. But yeah, I did it because I felt, okay, this is a pretty good student. If I can do anything to help their career, it's worth my time to do it.
Got it. Well, thank you for educating me on this professor side, because I didn't know what happens in that process on the other side of the world. And now, if you have to share some inspiring words for people to get into academia, why do you think they should come into academia and not go to corporates where maybe the money is more? So why should they get into academia and not go there?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I would say most people should not get into academia, just statistically speaking, because academia is for people with a particular kind of attitude, and that attitude is one of being extremely curious. So, for example, I actually like history a lot. I read a lot of history. I always tell people I started learning history after I stopped learning it in school. So while I was learning history in school, yeah, I was very good at mugging up stuff. I can tell you Battle of Panipat took place between these people on this year and that kind of stuff. Battle of Panipat is kind of the typical, stereotypical example. But it was after 10th that I started just reading history on my own. And that's when I found, okay, when you learn and when you read on your own and try to synthesize things on your own, that's when I found it to be much more interesting. And I'm sure there are many people who just stop reading history period because nobody's teaching it to them. So the point of the example was that academia is for a kind of people who do very well, who are curious, who can figure things out on their own. Not to say that they have to do everything on their own. That's why you have students to do a lot of research, but who can take care of the larger aspects of it, to ask curious questions, to try to figure out new techniques or encourage people to figure out new techniques. If you are more comfortable as a person to do tasks given to you, where you are not really worried about the big picture, you're just worried about what's in front of you, then academia is not for you, because it's a field where you pretty much have to be self-motivated throughout your journey, and you have to be very curious about things which you have no business being curious about. So I would say for most people don't get into it, but if you find yourself in that category I mentioned, it's worth investigating. It's a satisfying job if you have that attitude.
What are the good parts of being in this career?
The best part is students. So as I said, there are 90% of students whose names you won't remember and you won't remember anything about them. But there are 10% who are really fun to be with. They're young, they bring a lot of energy to things, they bring a lot of curiosity that you don't have the energy for anymore. So when I interact with some of our best students at IIT Gandhinagar, I feel refreshed myself. Like I pull energy from them. So dealing with students is definitely one of the best parts of it. And then you learn research, you learn new things. At the end of a PhD thesis, you realize, okay, we just developed a whole bunch of new things that nobody else has done before. That's satisfying. that you've added to the body of knowledge in some way.
Got it. And over the years, as you're getting more experience, does it become more difficult to do research or does it become easier to do research? Because then you've spent so much time in it, you're very narrow-minded, or because you've done so much innovation, you're very broad-minded. How does it play out as you spend more and more time in it?
So I would say it varies. So for example, if you've been here for a long time, if you're a senior professor, then people would be more inclined to fund some of your research, even riskier research. Whereas if you're an assistant professor, they would say, okay, don't do something too risky initially. So you have to curb your enthusiasm a bit in the beginning. When you're a senior professor, you have an advantage that you probably have a decent sized lab, that you have like 5 or 6 students at least. And so they can help each other out quite a lot. So instead of them coming to you for every single thing, they can figure a lot of stuff out between themselves. So that's an advantage a senior professor gets. On the flip side, however, expectations from a senior professor are much higher. So as a junior faculty, you have 2 PhD students and you're just getting 1, 2 papers out per year. Fine. It's seen as good enough. If you're a senior professor who's only got 2 PhD students and barely publishing in a year, it's pretty devastating to your reputation. So you are expected to do a lot more. You're expected to take on more administrative responsibilities. You shouldn't just be tossing all the dean positions to younger professors because you don't want to do anything. So expectations on the service side tend to go up as you go higher, which means that you have to manage your time and manage your research and teaching much better.
Got it. And what do you think your plans are for next 10, 15 years? You know, in the past it was clear plan. Is it clear now? It's a clear path forward ahead as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would be lying if I said yes. So that was kind of a struggle after I got the position that, well, I had a 10-year long path to be a professor, which I knew exactly what the ending was. And now that I got to the ending, it's a little bit harder to figure out where to go from here. So I have a general idea. There's a particular kind of research I would like to do. There's a particular narrow field where I'm interested to add my largest contribution. So I would be happy spending the next 10, 15 years adding knowledge in a particular direction and teaching my courses with that similar bias. That if I think there are certain important topics students should know, I would rather spend more time on that than on things that I don't think are very important in class. So I would say for the next 10, 15 years, my idea is to be in a narrow field, do as well as I can, and add as much knowledge to it as possible. After that, well, I have no idea. I can only plan so far ahead.
Got it. And in academia, from assistant professor, you become professor and
No,
senior
so from
professor,
assistant, you become an associate professor,
associate.
and from associate, you become a full professor.
And after that, is there a levels to it or?
Academically, no, but many people after that they choose to go a little bit deeper into administrative roles. So you may become a big shot dean, or you may become a director of some institution, or vice chancellor or something somewhere. So academically, it ends at 3 ranks. Administratively, you can go higher.
Got it. So academically is what are the criteria you need to, am I speaking
No, no, no,
low?
good. I can hear you.
Okay. So do you need to spend a fixed tenure or is it more how many papers? What's the criteria to
Yeah,
go
so,
to
so there
the
is a
next
minimum
level?
tenure that you're not going to become an associate professor in 2 years. There's a minimum time expectation, which is a reasonable expectation. But primarily it depends on research. So, and that's where IITs have changed. Once upon a time, it was just a function of teaching. Now it's almost entirely a function of research. So you need to have, at a minimum, you must have had some number of research projects that you've completed, some number of PhD students that you've graduated, some number of papers in high quality journals that you must have published. And then at some point when you think you're ready, you put in an application and say that, okay, I think I have everything. Here is my application justifying that I have everything. Give me a position at a higher rank. And then you go through an interview, there's an evaluation committee. Many people get rejected at that point and they're told to apply again next year. Many people also get accepted at that point. So then you go through that. So even when you get a promotion, is really up to you. When do you want to apply for the promotion? You can very much be an assistant professor for your entire life if you want to in India.
Okay. So it's not a hierarchy that there needs to be four assistant under one associate senior. It's independent. Whoever
No,
wants to
it's
go wherever.
independent. Now, good institutional planning, which I'm not saying every institution does it well, but Good institutional planning is to have a good mix of all the three.
Hmm.
Poor institutional planning, which will mean that you have way too many assistant professors, which could be if you're a young institution.
Hmm.
Or it could mean that you have too many professors and too few assistant professors, which means you stop hiring anybody. Or nobody wants to come
Hmm.
to you.
I see. Got it. So these three levels, assistant professor, associate professor, and professor. Is there a typical number, 5 year it takes to get to next level or 10 years?
No, it's not 5. So the minimum time expected as an assistant professor is about 6 years. That doesn't mean if you cross 6, you automatically become an associate professor. And then I believe from associate to full professor is around another 6 years, something roughly there. So it will take you about a dozen years, 12 to 15 years to actually become a full professor. And keep in mind, you need a PhD before that. So most people who are assistant professors are already in their 30s. So they probably have only 30 more years of working life left. So, which means half your time goes to try to get the highest position, and then half your career goes on the higher position.
Got it. Because as a human, we want to go to next level, have a goal at least, like, okay, this is next, I want to do this. Once you become professor, I'm thinking from professor mindset, that probably then you get more inclined at administrative. That's something different. That's something where you're getting more responsibility. So that becomes a next goal once you're a professor. Until
Yes, so
professor,
that's one.
it's
I mean, another
clear.
thing is there are many research awards, for lifetime contribution of research. In India, there's the Bhatnagar Award and there are other fellowships. So then you try to get awards and fellowships by doing good research. So then it's not exactly like a salaried position or something. It's more kind of a prestige thing that you won an award or you hold a certain fellowship or something like that. So you start looking at those kind of things.
Got it. So on the corporations or industry side, you have these big figures, like Ambani, Elon Musk, like big public figures, or being at the Mark Zuckerberg. Uh, but we see this less in academia, right? A big public figures in academia are not that many in the people's awareness. So do you think that impacts ambition as well? If a kid sees Elon Musk, he said, I want to be Elon Musk, then he has a drive. But we need to maybe have a public figures on the teaching side, which gets kids excited, like, okay, he's a great teacher, I want to become someone like them.
So, yes and no. So, yeah, it would certainly be good to have kids inspired to pursue this as a career. But the thing about higher education, particularly technical higher education, is it's very difficult to understand what the person is talking about without a lot of background. So, if I start teaching finite element method to a fifth class student, I'm not going to inspire them, no matter how good I am, because it's just there's a lot of background you need. So because whereas yeah, you can see Mark Zuckerberg, he dropped out of college. I think he dropped out of college or whatever he did. It's inspirational without knowing a lot of the details. Whereas with technical education, you are not going to get inspired until you speak the same language and have the same background knowledge. So it takes much longer to get that.
Is there a good movie made on professor?
Okay, so I don't know if it's a good movie, but I don't. So your viewers might have heard something called PhD comics, and if PhD there stands for piled higher and deeper. So this was a guy from Stanford, I think, who did his PhD and started a comic strip about academic life. And he also produced two movies out of it called the PhD movie one and the PhD movie two. It is funny. It's meant to be comedic, not inaccurate in terms of what happens inside. Of course, it's a little bit exaggerated because it's supposed to be funny, but not entirely inaccurate. If you want to know what is the life of a student or a professor, the movie is not a bad way to get started. So PhD movie one and PhD two, and then PhD comics. There are thousands of strips. They're on Instagram or whatever.
I see. Got it. Last question on these series of questions. It's little heavy. I ask everyone from every field, how do you define purpose of life? What is your life purpose?
Wow. So I saw some of your previous interviews, so I'm cheating a little bit, but I agree with what many others said. Purpose of life is to be happy. Uh, and happy and successful are not necessarily the same thing. You can be happy even after failing, but you be happy when you try to do something, it may or may not work out, but at least you have the satisfaction that you tried. So to me, the purpose of life is to find something that's difficult enough that you want to pursue it. Whether you fail or succeed in it is not too material, but you're happy that you tried something and your life was worth something in the sense that you made an effort to do something more than what you would have done otherwise. So yeah, purpose of life is to be happy, and the rest of what I said.
And it definitely seems you are in a career that you enjoy. That definitely seems you're something enjoying. So
Yeah, I would say in my batch of civil, I don't think I'm wrong, but I might be wrong. I don't think anybody else became a professor from my batch in civil. There were several who got a PhD. Probably maybe around 10 or 5 to 10% of my batch did go on to get a PhD. But I'm the only one who continued in the same academic line. I'm pretty sure that, at least in civil, I'm pretty sure that statistic is correct.
how about plus minus 1 2 years of your batch? Like, you know anyone who became professor from civil?
I know a few, again, definitely single digits and definitely less than five in each year. Yeah, maybe I can list two or three more who I know who continued to stay in academia. But again, that's out of a batch size of 100 plus. So yeah, statistically, it's negligible. It's less than 5%. Alpha is 0.05.
It's a tough task, right? Like you need to do a lot of prerequisite, and it's a different lifestyle. I mean, today as we spoke, it requires a different mindset. It requires more consistent mindset. You need to be consistently teaching, consistently delivering research, which is creative, which is similar in industry, but there is a different aspect. Like in an industry, we get new problems that we need to solve. It's not the same problem you're solving. There's a new technology coming, so need to learn new technology to solve the new problem. So there is a learning in industry, but it's a little different. Like you don't need to be completely creative. You can use what's available and solve things, whereas academia, you need to be really creative. And I just think about like some of the cases where you thought like this is a great idea, you pursue it for months and months, and at the end you
Doesn't work.
realize the results are not as you were expecting, so the research won't get published. Or does it happen that someone else published it before you were trying to publish it, and then you're like, he already published, she already
So if
published?
you're in the pure sciences, maths, chemistry, maths especially, but chemistry, bio especially, in fact, yes, it's unfortunately fairly common. But usually you know who those people are because you're working on a tiny enough problem that there may be one or two other people in the area. So if you're scooped is the word for this, that somebody published your work before you. If you're scooped, generally you may be surprised that you got scooped. You won't be surprised by who scooped. In engineering, it's a little more forgiving because engineering we're about practical stuff, which means that well somebody did this already, but I can still tweak a couple of parameters and get another paper. So, and I have actually scooped someone else in the past, very early on in my career. I had done some work which I knew someone else was doing, but I just published a lot faster than them, and they were mad at me. They caught me in a conference and were like, "Okay, who is this person and who did this work before me?" That was right in during my masters. So that was I scooped someone right at the beginning of my masters.
Got it. So they need to be secretive about the work they are doing to a level that they need to protect themselves as well, right? Everyone who's working
It,
in that kind
I'd
of.
say it depends what you're doing. So right now in my career, I mostly do computational work, which means I write software, etc. And my philosophy is open source. I open source everything. My philosophy being that 99% people will not be able to use my code. They won't understand how to use it. So there is no danger of being scoped. The 1% who could, chances are, even if I don't give them my code, I'm only delaying them by like a month. They'll do it anyway. So might as well give my code and tell them, okay, don't do it yourself. Give me some credit for what I did and then do whatever you want. So I'm not that scared of being scooped, but yeah, certainly people in the pure sciences, for them it's a bigger deal because their experiments are more expensive and more and take much more time.
Got it. Awesome. All right, we conducted our first two sessions. Now we'll go to the rapid fire round. So I'll just
Okay.
ask you few preferential questions just to get to know your personality. Uh, do you? The first set is just A or B, either or. Which one? Do
Mhm.
you prefer texting or talking?
Or texting. because I like to think and correct myself and kind of qualify everything I'm saying. It comes with writing papers. You get this habit.
Yeah,
So when I'm talking, I'm thinking too fast while talking. So I would rather
gotcha.
slow down my thinking by writing. So text.
Do you prefer indoor or outdoor?
I prefer outdoor. I don't get enough of it, and I wish I did it much more. But certainly, given any opportunity to get out of my office or get out of campus, I take it at first opportunity.
Got it. Do you prefer competition or collaboration?
I prefer competition because that's always what's, as I discussed, that's what got me up. But I would say I have evolved over time. Uh, to even maybe up to BTech, I mostly competed with other people. And that's what made me improve myself because I didn't want this person to get better marks than me, that kind of thinking. I'd say post PhD and during PhD, I had more competing with myself. That I did this previously, but I want to do better than myself without concerning myself with what other people are doing. So competition, but now mostly competing with myself more than other people.
Got it. I feel like in the beginning phase of a life, we need to be more competitive, and at later, then collaboration becomes more key because as an individual, you cannot do much. But initially, you are individual, like your marks, your grades, everything is about you.
I would say I like collaborate, and I do collaborate. I like collaborating with people who are competing with themselves, like who will get the best results in their part of the collaboration. So then, effectively, we are collaborating, but we are also competing. So if they're giving their 100%, we should give our 100%. I like that kind of collaboration, which I
I
get very
see.
little of, to be fair. But
That's
that's what I would
ideal.
prefer.
That's ideal. Collaboration among self-competitive people.
Yeah, I will say when I was in IIT Roorkee, I had organized a model UN during Cogni. So that's just a cultural event. And Harshit Agarwal was another student who worked with me. That was my earliest experience of something like that. That both of us are putting our 100%, trying to outdo each other in terms of how well we're organizing it. It was a complete pleasure to organize that.
Wow. What do you think is more important, end result or the journey?
Journey is more important for the same question as previously. It gives you satisfaction and happiness in life. As long as you're satisfied with the journey, the end result may or may not live up to your expectations. It doesn't make too much of a difference.
What do you prefer, self-learning or learning from a teacher?
Self-learning because that's what I do right now. I don't have anyone to teach me. I would say, more fundamentally, I prefer self-learning because unfortunately, a lot of the teaching I experienced in India and even outside, too much rote learning, too much formulaic learning. When I do self-learning, I can kind of take my time to figure out some things on my own instead of having to follow a schedule from someone else. So I find self-learning is a lot better just so I can focus on what I'm interested in.
Got it. And in your field, like being in a research, coming up with new ideas, it's much more suitable
It's all
to
self-learning, basically.
self-learner, right?
It's all
Yeah.
self-learning.
Would you rather be able to speak to all animals or speak every language?
So I would say speak every language, but with a qualification. So among the various things I have an amateurish interest in is linguistics. So linguistics is the science of languages, but it's not the same as knowing all languages. It's actually understanding patterns of similarity and differences between languages. And that's how language families, etc. are created. So I am very interested in linguistics, particularly the linguistic development of in the Indian subcontinent, very, very linguistically diverse place. So, example, one statement that people tend to make is that Hindi came from Sanskrit. Is actually it's wrong at a fundamental level, but it's right at a smaller level. But to understand the nuances of that, you have to understand what is a language, what does it mean to come from another language, etc., which I won't go into. So I would like to speak every language, but more fundamentally, I would like to understand the dynamic, the mechanics of every language, as opposed to just speaking.
Got it. Can you speak Malayalam and Telugu?
I can understand parts of Telugu because I lived here. Malayalam, chetta, chetti, two words basically is what I know, which is like bhaiya and behan saab, that type. So I didn't manage to pick up Malayalam. But Malayalam has a very strong Tamil root, but with a lot of Sanskrit vocabulary influences. So grammar tends to be strong to Tamil to the extent I understand it, but the vocabulary tends to be heavily influenced by Sanskrit. So it's a very unique language in that respect.
Got it. Street smart or book smart?
Wrong person to ask this question. No, I would, well, obviously, I would say book smart because I would like someone to write some code for me tomorrow. Uh, but as a civil engineer, you have to be street smart also, especially when you're meeting people who are not specialists in your field, who are kind of practicing engineers, as we call them. Where if you start explaining to them the curiosities of plate theory and all that, it's going to go over their heads. So you have to be street smart when you're talking to people, but when you're sitting down and doing your work, you have to be pretty book smart.
Hmm. Especially when you guys are getting research and grants and all these, I would think there's a lot of politics involved there, right?
So you have to, if you write a grant saying, I want to study the applicability of Mendelian plate theory to slabs in high-rise buildings. I'm just making up a pretty good example, actually. It makes no sense to anybody. You have to state it that I want to create a research problem where I can reduce the cost of a high-rise building by optimizing the amount of concrete to be used. These two are the same problem, which I just said. But one of them makes no sense to most people, and the other one seems like a reasonable problem to pursue. So you have to kind of keep these things in mind.
Got it. Would you rather climb a mountain or jump from a plane?
I would rather climb a mountain, but not any mountain. As I mentioned, I lived in Pittsburgh, and to date, my favorite city that I ever lived in. So Pittsburgh is in the Appalachian Mountains. You can say the hills, depending on your perspective. Around Pittsburgh, there's something called the Montour Trail, which is kind of old railroad trails inside in the hills. And I had hiked most of it while I was there. So I would love to go back and finish that hiking. So the answer is I would like to hike a mountain, particularly the mountains around Pittsburgh.
Got it. Now, some hypothetical questions. If you have a day of no commitment, no responsibility, how would you live that day?
I would probably just read a book. So I read a lot of books. I read 27 this year. And next year, similarly, I have a target obviously every year because I compete. I'm competitive. So I would probably just, if I had nothing else to do, I would just read a book.
Is it a fiction, non-fiction, technical? What kind of
So
book?
my top genres are history and historical fiction. So historical fiction is when you make fictional characters in a real historical setting. For example, lives of people during World War II. They're not real people, but the facts, the incidents happening are real. So my number one genre is historical fiction, and then number two is science fiction. So generally, I read these, and I try to stay away from too much of non-fiction because a lot of it tends to be self-help books, which frankly I don't like. So mostly I try to stick to these two. Once in a while, I'll read some self-help books now and then.
Got it. Uh, this is good question for you since you like history. If you could time travel, where would you go in past or future, any particular point of time?
Hmm. Okay, so it goes back to the linguistics question. So a very common question in India is what is the origin of the language families in India? And there's a particular running theory on what it is, which I won't name, but it's a very controversial theory. I would like to go back to that point of time and see, okay, so language moves with people, but language moves by the rule of minority. That means you only need a small group of people who speak a language to become the dominant linguistic group in a location. So, and that's why it's very difficult to figure out how did a language emerge in a location because you're looking at small signals in a large amount of noise. So, I would ideally like to go back to when Sanskrit language developed or came to the Indian subcontinent. And whether it's developed or came is itself a question by itself. I would like to go back to that period and get a definitive answer, which is otherwise very difficult to get because of the challenges of linguistics. And I'm not a linguistics professor. Right? I might have made a lot of errors in everything I just said right now. It's just an amateur interest.
Got it. And if you could be invisible for a day, what would you do?
I'm mostly invisible every day because I still sit in my office the whole day. And nobody knows I'm there. I don't know. I probably just walk around, do the same thing that I would do if I was visible. I don't see much difference.
See what other researchers are doing, what secrets they have kept under their table.
Yeah, ultimately they all publish it. So with a time lag, I'll
Yeah.
anyway find out what they're doing. So what's the
Got it.
point?
Okay. One thing you wish to change about yourself.
I would like to do more outdoors and sports stuff. So in Roorkee, well, I was never a sporty person as such. In Roorkee, I never actually went to the sports complex or whatever at all, believe it or not. When I was in the US, I changed that. In the US, I ran two 5Ks and a 10K, and I still have the medals for those. Back in India, I've been so busy in the last year, I haven't had time to get back to it. So I would like to kind of balance out physical health and mental health a little better. And I would like to get more sleep, but I suspect that's not happening. So it depends. If I have a lot of slides to make, I might sleep for 3 hours. If I'm lucky on a weekend, I might get 6 hours.
I see.
It's just a lot of work, basically.
And that's especially because you're starting your
Pretty,
professor career. So,
yeah,
gotcha.
pretty common in this field, unfortunately. And there's good research to show that. So that's the case with students and professors, that sleep tends to suffer a lot because it's such a busy career.
Mm. But for a long time, like 10, 15, 12 years, it might be very tricky, right? Maybe a couple of years you can get this done. Long
I
term
don't know. I had a back at UIUC, not my advisor, but another professor who's very famous in the field. He was known to reply to emails at 4 a.m. It was not unusual for him. And I think he's in his late 50s now. So yeah, he's
we'll
still at it.
figure out in 10 years. If the podcast continues, you're here in 20 years, we'll talk back, see how is it going
I don't know. Everybody tells me don't be like that. I suspect I'm going to be like that.
on. Okay, so if you are sent back to 10th grade, would you still pursue to go to IIT?
And I had freedom to choose what I wanted to. Oh, no, no, no. When you're in 10th grade, you don't have freedom to choose anything in India. Honestly, now that I think of it, if I had complete freedom and more time to think about career, I would have been a lawyer. I still enjoy law very much. Ironically, law and research are somewhat similar, surprisingly, to each other in terms of the analytical thinking that goes into it. They're not that different from each other, which is why I'm probably still enjoying this career. But yeah, go back to 10th class and just unfettered choose a career knowing what I know now. I would have probably been a lawyer. I find that a very interesting field.
Got it. Do you still engage in debates in some form or fashion?
So it's a good question, and it comes back to what I just said, that the research is similar. So answer is yes, but the medium is different. Now, back then you debated, okay, India should have a presidential system instead of parliamentary system. That's what a legal debate would look like. Now you debate on, well, thin plate theory applies to this problem in some cases, but it doesn't apply to this problem in other cases. It's still a debate. So the purpose of publishing a paper is to put a perspective out there. And then somebody can publish something else disproving your perspective or qualifying your perspective. So it's still a debate on a different topic on a different medium. Uh, so I would say I still do it in just kind of a roundabout way as opposed to what I would do as law. Which is why I say law and research are surprisingly similar fields.
Hmm. I feel if you're passionate in two fields, you tend to find similarities in those. Like I tend to find a lot of similarities in sports and any other field that I get engaged in. So that's something special because you have so much knowledge, you can see the common patterns underneath both fields or both areas.
Yeah, and I think common patterns is the right word there, right? It takes a fair amount of maturity to find patterns in whatever is happening in daily life.
Hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so few more questions about personality. What would you consider as your greatest achievement?
What would I consider as my greatest achievement? Okay, this is going to be a weird answer, but back when I was in Pittsburgh, I ran the Pittsburgh 5K. That was the year after the pandemic, and we were all locked up, and it's a city I enjoyed very much. And again, I'm someone who was never very good at sports, always in poor health, etc. And Pittsburgh is a very hilly city. So running in Pittsburgh is not the same as running anywhere else. So when I did that and crossed the finish line, that felt like, okay, this is a real achievement in life. I know I could have said my first paper, my thesis or whatever, my first student who's going to graduate next semester. But I still find that personal achievement where I overcame one of my own shortcomings, that was a bigger achievement.
Got it. These greatest achievements are, I feel like, often surprises. For example, I was watching Rohit Sharma's podcast, and when it's out, what's your greatest achievement? He said his hat trick. When he took a hat trick, that's
Yeah.
his, because that's something he wasn't expect. Like something for him, it's very special when you do something like that. So,
Yep. So yeah,
uh,
greatest achievement. And people might say buying a car is a greatest achievement, which is fine. I don't have any judgment on it.
yeah,
Or buying a home. To me, it was kind of beating myself in something that I was bad at.
gotcha. How long does it take for you to get ready?
Get ready for what? It depends. It can take as little as 15 minutes. It can take as much as 150 minutes. 150 is exaggeration, more like 1.5 hours, so 90 minutes. Well, I guess the biggest variable is how long do I spend on my phone. I remember a few days ago, I had some issues that the Wi-Fi wasn't working in the morning. It was a temporary issue, so I couldn't check anything on my phone. Yeah, that day I was pretty like I was in my office earlier than I expected. But other days, yeah, I'm on my phone and I'm looking through the news, etc. That takes a little more time. So if I need to be in a meeting, I can be there at any time. I take very little time to get ready. But it depends on how much I push myself to get off my phone, basically.
Got it. So, what are the top three apps on your phone that you use?
Let's see. Instagram, unfortunately, I admit it. Facebook also, it shows my age because I watch videos, etc. on it. Third app, I have Google News. So I actually spend quite an inordinate amount of time going through the news. Probably more than I should, heavily. But again, when I was a kid, I used to read the newspaper very regularly. Even in Roorkee, I used to read it. So this is kind of an extension of that. So Instagram, Facebook, Google News are the top three.
Got it. So, in the Google News, do you prefer it over the typical old newspaper, or do you like it? Because I felt the personalized news sometimes it's good, but then I felt like I'm not exposed to news that I don't know. Like it's just giving me the news that I'm interested in. So that discovery of unknown is gets limited.
Yeah, it's a good question. I wish I could go back to reading newspapers, but the truth is there isn't enough time to sit down for 2 hours in a day to read the newspaper. And like fewer and fewer people get the newspaper. It's kind of dying out as a thing. I did when I was in the US. I did for some time try to read the New York Times. Wow, that was tough. That took like 6 hours to read from front to back. So as a way to economize on time, Google News is good. But yeah, you're right. You're kind of only getting what the algorithm wants to give you.
Right, right. What's your last Google search?
It's my last one research. Interesting. Uh, there's some technical stuff. I think I was checking how to derive the stiffness matrix for something, which doesn't need to make any sense to anybody. But yeah, I'm basically trying to work on a problem that my student has faced, where I helped with the code and now it's not working, and I think I made a mistake in the formulation. So I'm trying to figure out what mistake I went back and made. So yeah, not the best answer I could give, but that's my
I
answer.
mean, that's we just want to know what the professor is searching on Google. So,
You search that I made a mistake and I don't know how to solve it. How do I solve it? That's what you search for.
all right, just the last section of this podcast. These are some deep questions. Uh, what's the best advice you have ever received?
So the best advice I received to date was after I came back from the US to India. On the internet somewhere, I got the advice: don't complain about in the first year. So the two countries are completely different, obviously. Uh, don't complain about stuff. Like in your first year, just live, just accept whatever is there. There are good things and bad things on both sides. Don't complain, just live through it. And then second year onwards, you can join everybody else and complain about everything. But 1 year, if you don't kind of get out of that mindset that I've made a mistake, which many people tend to get into, you're going to be miserable. So don't complain, just accept things as they go. And then once you're back in the system, then you can do whatever complaining you want. So that has been pretty good advice, which I'm about to reach my 1 year in a few weeks. So then I'll start complaining like crazy. Uh, but it's been good advice for the last year.
Yeah, then you maybe during first year you're external criticizing. After 1 year, you're part of system. You're criticizing your own system.
So the thing is, I might be wrong, but in the first year, you tend to criticize things for being different and not for being bad. right? It's just that, well, people don't drive on lanes here, people drive in their lanes here, so it's so difficult to drive. But the truth is, people get from one place to the other here. It's just a different way of doing it, right? So if you just keep criticizing everything, you kind of start being miserable because you're not criticizing outcomes, you're criticizing procedures, and procedures can be different. So it's best not to criticize procedures, see outcomes, and then criticize outcomes that you don't like.
Good advice. Great
That
advice.
was the best advice I got. It's helped me a lot.
What's your favorite book or movie that you would recommend people to read or watch?
So I'll answer in movie. I'm the wrong person to ask for movie because I watch so few movies. My favorite movie was Interstellar, which I've seen 5 times, and that might be the last movie I saw also. So I'm the wrong person to ask about movies. But books, I would say more than a particular book. If for those who are interested in fiction and historical fiction, there is a particular author named Robert Harris. He's a British author. He is very good. Like he does historical fiction, but from a variety of different genres. So he'll have spy fiction, World War II fiction, war fiction, etc. So that's one, Robert Harris. There's another one, Ken Follett, Follett. It's a French name. So Ken Follett, he also does a lot of historical fiction. He tends to like trilogies. So he had my favorite one of his was the Century trilogy, where he followed a family from World War One, World War Two, and the Cold War. What happened to that family over that entire century? So he kind of summarized or fictionalized a century of war through 3 books. So that was also a pretty good book. So Robert Harris and Ken Follett are the 2 best ones I would recommend.
Got it. One thing I've read is people who read book lives many lives. As you're reading book, you are into the book, try to live that. So,
Was that Maya Angelou? Maybe I've heard that quote also. Or maybe you visit many places, something like that, if you read books.
mm,
But yeah, I agree. And so I like reading history, so I certainly visit a lot of places.
so when you said you're not watching many movies, I'm just extending that you're not watching many TV series, right? Because TV series is like consume 10 times the time of movie. Or are you watching TV
I
series?
do like so I might so if there is a series that has like 10 episodes, I might take like 6 months to finish it. So I'm definitely not sitting and watching every hour to hour. No, I don't have time for binge watching and I don't have the interest either. Binge reading I do. But binge watching I don't. But I do see some TV series. I like to watch a lot of legal and law related things. So there is one, I think it's on Amazon, it's called The Good Wife. It's basically the story of a woman who's married to a politician who kind of has a divorce and has to go back to legal practice. And then what is her challenges in the field of legal practice. And of course, there was the most famous one, which is Boston Legal, which was funny. And then there's a
Suits?
prequel to it, which I forgot, but that was also a good one.
How about Suits? Suits is something
So
you
Suits
would
is
like.
I didn't like Suits that much because the courtroom stuff in Suits was pretty like it wasn't realistic and it was a little lame. Yeah, the drama around the courtroom was interesting to watch, but when you actually go to the court and the rules of evidence and rules of procedure, they played a lot of fast and loose with those rules. So I kind of
Got
didn't appreciate Suits that much for that.
it. Got it. Okay, one last message or advice you have for people who are watching. What advice, one message you would like to give to the world out there?
So the message I'll give, maybe not to the whole world, but to undergraduate students who are starting, because I tend to be literally surrounded by them. Uh, the most important thing I think is to don't waste your time trying everything. And that's not to say don't explore the world, but there is a cost to indecision. P.V. Narasimha Rao, former Prime Minister, he said not making a decision is also a decision. So just because you're not choosing a career, that doesn't mean life is not moving on, right? When other people are choosing a career, they are also making a decision for you in a way because you're trying. And I said career, not job, right? There's a difference between the two. But when other people are making career choices and you're not, effectively you're letting them choose your career choice because the way the market is structured around you. So there is something to be said about exploring career opportunities, exploring your interests, but don't try not to be a jack of all trades. figure out what is good, not necessarily the best, but figure out what is good and do as well as you can in that. And then enjoy the journey of that. Don't worry too much about the outcome of it. So I see that problem a lot with BTech students. They are into too many things and they do badly in all of them. So my advice, particularly to them, but I guess generally also, is don't be so indecisive. Pick something and be good at it. Don't try to get into everything and be bad at everything.
Man, that's very powerful advice for, I feel like for everyone, especially because these days we get so many inputs about life-changing, priority-changing inputs with the social media. You get so many ideas. I read somewhere we get more life-changing, priority-shifting ideas in last 72 hours than our parents got in their whole life. So
Yeah, that's
indecision,
certainly
definitely.
possible. I mean, I and our generation group was the transition generation between internet and no internet. And
Hmm,
life certainly feels different between the two.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sushobhan,
Mhm.
for taking your time from busy life. I mean, I appreciate it so much, so much, so much more now that I know how busy you are for taking time. And I learned a lot about the life of professor, and especially I hope people who want to pursue career or are curious about the life of professor watch it and get some helpful tips and insight into it. That's the whole idea because in college it's very rare to get guidance what each field contains and whether that something resonate or not. So this would be something that people can watch and hopefully they get more insights into it. So want to
Yeah, I'd
appreciate
say
you.
thank you for running the podcast. I saw some of the previous episodes and I followed your channel also. So everyone should follow
Oh,
the channel. It is
thank
pretty
you.
good. I think you're doing something good. I wish more people looked at it. And especially when I look at students right now whose best source of knowledge tends to be their seniors who themselves barely know anything. I think it's good if they have mediums to reach out to alumni and older IITians to get some advice
Right.
from people who've seen more of life than just what's around campus.
Exactly, exactly. And also intention is to talk to people who are graduate at 40 years because we don't know perspective on
Yeah,
life from 60 year, 50 years. So
yeah,
that's the whole
absolutely.
idea. Talk to people of different ages and learn and also provide guidance whoever need one. So appreciate you a lot. Thank you so much and wish you good luck in your field. And
Thank you.
hopefully in future we have episode 2 where we come back and take some of the new questions that people might have for you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be glad to answer questions. I do it all the time with students, so it's part of my job.